The moment Michael Wilson uncovered his family's darkest secret, his entire world began to crumble. The luxury resort he'd just inherited wasn't just a haven for the wealthy, it hid something far more sinister, something that could destroy everything his father had fought to build. A web of lies and betrayals, spun by those he trusted most, was about to unravel. Now, as Michael struggles to keep control, he must face not only hidden enemies, but the shadows of his own legacy. Every choice he makes from here could lead to his downfall or his redemption. But time is running out, and the real threat is much closer than he realizes. How long could you live a lie, Iv? Michael Wilson stood by the large bay window, staring out at the pristine beach and the sprawling resort his family had built over generations. The sudden death of his father, Robert Wilson, left him with a deep sense of loss, and now an even greater responsibility weighed on his shoulders. His father had always been the pillar of the family, running the resort with a blend of charm and authority that made him a beloved figure in the local community. Michael had never imagined himself following in those footsteps. His mother, Linda, entered the room, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor. "Michael, the reading of the will is in an hour. Are you ready?" Michael turned, his face reflecting the weight of uncertainty. "I guess so. I never thought I'd have to deal with all this so soon." Linda gave him a sympathetic smile, though her eyes betrayed a hint of expectation. "Your father was a great man. This place was his life's work. Now it's your turn to carry on his legacy." Michael nodded, though the words felt heavy. He had grown up around the resort, but he had always seen it as something distant, a part of his father's world, not his. Now it was about to become his reality. The lawyer's office was a stark contrast to the vibrant colors of the resort. Michael sat next to Linda as the lawyer, an older man with glasses perched on the end of his nose, began reading the will. The formalities seemed to drag on until finally the lawyer reached the part everyone had been waiting for. "To my son, Michael Wilson, I leave full ownership of the Wilson Beach Resort." Michael let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, but the lawyer raised a hand, indicating there was more to come. On one condition. The room fell silent. Michael's eyes darted to his mother, who looked just as confused as he felt. The lawyer continued, "Michael, in order to claim the full inheritance, you must work at the resort for 6 months as a janitor." Michael blinked, certain he had misheard. "A janitor?" His voice was incredulous. "Yes," the lawyer confirmed. "But your father specified that you must work in this role under a different identity and not reveal to anyone that you are the owner. You must prove you understand the workings of the resort from the ground up before you can take full control." Michael sat back in his chair, his mind racing. "But why? What does that prove?" Linda cleared her throat, her voice soft but firm. "Your father wanted you to understand every aspect of the resort, not just as an owner, but as a worker. He believed in earning respect, not demanding it." Michael shook his head. "But a janitor for 6 months? How am I supposed to do that?" The lawyer adjusted his glasses. "That's up to you, Michael. If you refuse, the resort will be managed by a trustee until it is sold." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. The idea of the resort being sold was unthinkable. Despite his misgivings, he'd grown up here, and the thought of losing it forever made him feel nauseous. "All right," Michael said slowly, the weight of his decision sinking in. "I'll do it. I'll take the job." The next few days passed in a blur as Michael prepared to take on his new secret identity. His mother had been surprisingly supportive, though she expressed concern over how challenging the task would be. I know you're doing this for your father," Linda said, her eyes filled with a mix of pride and worry. "But don't lose sight of who you are in the process." Michael nodded, though deep down, he wasn't sure what that even meant anymore. He had spent years working as a financial analyst, miles away from the world of hospitality, and now he was about to become a janitor in his own resort. His first day as Mike, the new janitor, felt surreal. Dressed in a plain uniform and cap, Michael arrived at the staff quarters early in the morning, blending into the workforce in a way he had never imagined. He felt out of place, awkward even, but he knew he couldn't afford to stand out. As he walked through the resort, pushing a cleaning cart, he saw the familiar sights of the hotel, the lobby with its grand chandeliers, the beach view from the terrace, the sound of guests chatting happily. Yet for the first time, he was invisible to them, just another worker cleaning up their messes. "Hey, new guy," a voice called out, snapping him out of his thoughts. He turned to see a young woman in a waitress uniform approaching him with a warm smile. "You're the new janitor, right?" "Yeah, that's me," Michael replied, adjusting his cap nervously. "I'm Sophia," she introduced herself, extending her hand. "If you need any help around here, just ask. I've been working here for a couple of years while I finish my accounting degree." Michael shook her hand, grateful for the friendly gesture. "Thanks. I'll keep that in mind." As Sophia walked away, Michael couldn't help but feel a strange sense of irony. Here he was, the supposed owner of the resort, yet he was the one being offered help. By the end of his first day, Michael was exhausted. His hands ached from scrubbing floors, and his back hurt from carrying heavy garbage bags. This was not what he had imagined his life would be like at 30, but as he collapsed into bed that night, he couldn't deny that it felt strangely real. For the first time, he wasn't the boss's son. He was just Mike, the janitor. And for now, that was exactly who he needed to be. Michael's second day as Mike the janitor started earlier than expected. He had barely slept the night before, his mind replaying the events of the day over and over. Everything felt surreal. From growing up as the son of a resort owner to now cleaning its hallways, it was like stepping into an alternate universe. And yet, there was no way out. The condition in his father's will was clear: 6 months as a janitor, or the resort would be sold. He had no choice. Dressed in the same plain uniform, Michael walked through the staff entrance and into the maintenance area, where he'd been instructed to meet with Mark, the head of janitorial services. Mark was a no-nonsense, middle-aged man with years of experience working at the resort. His face was weathered from countless hours spent keeping the place in pristine condition. "So, Mike, right?" Mark asked, his voice gruff. "Yeah, that's me," Michael responded, still adjusting to his new identity. Mark gave him a once-over, as if sizing him up. "You look like you've never held a mop in your life." Michael tried to laugh it off. "You could say that." "Well, you're going to learn fast. This place doesn't clean itself," Mark said, handing him a checklist and a set of keys. "You'll start with the pool area. People get messy out there, and it's our job to make sure it looks spotless by morning." Michael nodded, accepting the keys. He could feel the weight of Mark's judgment, but there was no time for explanations. His father's will demanded that he keep his true identity hidden. For now, he was just Mike, the guy who needed to learn how to clean a pool deck. The pool area was one of the resort's crown jewels, a luxurious space lined with sunbeds and palm trees overlooking the pristine beach. In the early morning light, it was peaceful, with only the sounds of waves in the distance. Michael glanced at the checklist: clean the pool deck, empty trash cans, sanitize the lounge chairs, and make sure everything was ready for the first guests. The work was far more tedious than he had imagined. By the time he had emptied the trash cans and started scrubbing the tile floor around the pool, his muscles were already aching. Every time he looked up, it seemed like the task ahead was only growing. The grandeur of the resort that had once seemed so effortless now felt overwhelming. As he continued, a shadow approached him. Michael looked up and saw Sophia walking by, holding a tray of towels for the guests. "Hey, Mike," she called out cheerfully, her friendly smile breaking through the early morning fatigue. "How's your first real day going?" Michael wiped the sweat from his forehead. "Honestly, it's harder than I thought," Sophia laughed. "Yeah, it's not all sunshine and cocktails, is it? Most people don't realize how much work goes into keeping this place running smoothly." "Clearly," Michael muttered, looking at the scrub brush in his hand. Sophia put down her tray of towels and sat on the edge of a lounge chair. "You know, I started as a waitress here, but I'm actually working on my accounting degree. Maybe one day I'll be managing the books for a place like this." Michael raised an eyebrow. "That's ambitious." "I think it's important to understand the bigger picture," Sophia replied. And that includes seeing the resort from every angle, not just from the top." Her words struck a chord with Michael. She didn't know it, but she was echoing his father's intentions perfectly. His father had always believed in leading by example, in knowing every aspect of the business. It was why Michael was stuck in this situation now. His father wanted him to earn the right to lead. Sophia stood up, brushing off her hands. "Anyway, I better get these towels out. But if you need anything, let me know. It's always tough in the beginning, but it gets easier." As she walked away, Michael found himself thinking about what she had said. Seeing the resort from every angle. Maybe his father had been right after all. There was something to be learned here, but Michael wasn't ready to admit that just yet. Later in the day, after hours of cleaning, Michael headed to the staff break room for a quick rest. It was a small, unassuming space, with a few worn-out chairs and a vending machine in the corner. A couple of other workers sat at the table, quietly eating their lunches. They didn't pay much attention to Michael as he sat down, blending into the background as just another employee. But as he sat there, something caught his attention. Two workers were whispering to each other, their voices low but urgent. "Did you hear about the missing supplies?" one of them asked. Yeah, the other replied. "Third time this month. Management says it's just inventory errors, but I don't know." Michael's ears perked up. Missing supplies. Inventory errors. His father had never mentioned anything like that when they had discussed the business. It sounded like a small issue, but something about the way they were talking made it feel more significant. He wanted to ask them more, but he knew better than to draw attention to himself. Instead, he made a mental note. Something wasn't right, and if he was going to survive these 6 months as a janitor, he needed to pay attention to everything, no matter how small. As the week went on, Michael began to settle into his new routine. The physical labor was tough, but he was getting the hang of it. Each day, he woke up before dawn, cleaned various areas of the resort, and tried to keep his head down. But it wasn't easy to go unnoticed, especially when Mark seemed to have an eye on him at all times. "Mike," Mark said one day as they cleaned the lobby floor together, "you've been doing all right. But I gotta say, for someone who just started, you don't act like a guy who's been out of work for long. You sure this is your first job?" Michael paused, his heart skipping a beat. He hadn't anticipated the suspicion. "Yeah, it's my first time doing this kind of work. But, you know, I pick things up fast." Mark narrowed his eyes, but didn't press further. "Just make sure you don't get too comfortable. This place can eat you alive if you don't know what you're doing." Michael nodded, keeping his focus on the floor. But Mark's words lingered. He couldn't afford to slip up, not with people like Mark watching his every move. One night, after an exhausting shift, Michael sat alone in his small apartment, just off the resort grounds. He stared at the framed picture of his father on the table beside him, feeling a strange mixture of anger and longing. "Why did you make this so difficult?" Michael whispered to the empty room. But deep down, he knew the answer. His father had wanted to prepare him, to test him, and to make sure he was ready for the responsibility that came with the resort. But more than that, he wanted Michael to see the people who made it all possible, the workers who kept the resort running day and night. And as much as Michael hated to admit it, the job was starting to change him. He was seeing things he never would have noticed as the owner's son. He was beginning to understand the resort, not as a luxury business, but as a living, breathing community of people, each with their own stories, struggles, and dreams. But there was still something else. The rumors about the missing supplies, the odd glances from Mark, and the growing sense that something was happening behind the scenes. Michael wasn't sure what it was yet, but he knew one thing for certain. This was just the beginning. The days had begun to blur together for Michael. He was slowly adjusting to his new routine as the resort's janitor, but every time he walked the grounds, he was reminded of the weight of his family's legacy. The Wilson Beach Resort had been a part of his life since he was a child. Every corner of the resort held memories of his father, Robert Wilson, working tirelessly to maintain it. Now, as Michael scrubbed floors and cleaned guest rooms under a false identity, he felt the pressure more than ever. It wasn't just the work that weighed on him. His mother, Linda, had always made it clear that she had high expectations for him. While she had been supportive of the Will's condition, Michael knew that deep down she was hoping he would rise to the challenge and carry on the Wilson legacy. She had always been the strong, poised woman who stood by his father's side, and now she was looking to Michael to fill that void. One afternoon, after a long shift, Michael received a text from his mother. "Linda, Michael, we need to talk. Can you come by the house tonight?" Michael stared at the message for a moment, feeling a knot form in his stomach. He hadn't been back to the family home since his father's funeral. The thought of sitting in the living room, surrounded by memories of his father, felt overwhelming, but he knew he couldn't avoid it forever. That evening, Michael stood outside the large, colonial-style house where he had grown up. The house was a testament to his family's wealth and status, with its perfectly manicured lawn and towering oak trees lining the driveway. Michael took a deep breath before stepping inside. Linda was waiting for him in the living room, a glass of wine in hand. She looked as elegant as ever, her hair perfectly styled, and her posture exuding calm authority. She smiled when she saw him, but there was a hint of something else in her eyes, perhaps worry or uncertainty. "Michael, I'm glad you came," she said, gesturing for him to sit down. "We haven't had much time to talk since everything happened." Michael sat across from her, feeling the tension between them. "Yeah, things have been busy." "I can imagine," Linda said, sipping her wine. "How's the job going?" Michael hesitated for a moment. He hadn't told his mother much about his work as a janitor. She knew the basics, of course, that it was part of the condition of the will, but he hadn't gone into detail about the day-to-day struggles. "It's tough," he admitted, "but I'm getting the hang of it." Linda nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Your father wanted you to see what it takes to keep the resort running. He believed that leadership isn't just about making decisions from the top. It's about understanding the people who work for you, the challenges they face." "I get that," Michael replied, feeling the weight of her words. "But it's hard, Mom. This isn't what I expected." "I know it's not," Linda said gently. "But your father believed in you. He knew you were capable of more than you realize. He saw something in you, Michael. That's why he left you the resort. He wanted you to grow into the role, to become the man he always knew you could be." Michael shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His father's expectations had always been a source of pressure, even when Robert was alive. Now, with him gone, that pressure felt even more suffocating. "Mom, I don't know if I'm ready for this," Michael confessed, his voice wavering. "I don't know if I can live up to what Dad wanted." Linda reached across the table and placed her hand on his. "You're stronger than you think, Michael. You've always had that strength in you. It's just a matter of finding it." Michael looked into his mother's eyes, seeing the same unwavering belief she had in his father. It was comforting, but it also made him feel like he had no room for failure. His father had believed in him. His mother believed in him. But could he believe in himself? As they sat in silence for a moment, Linda took a deep breath, her tone softening. "There's something else I wanted to talk to you about." Michael raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" "I know the will was a shock," Linda began, her voice measured. "But your father had a reason for everything he did. I've been thinking about the future, your future. I want you to know that I support you, no matter what happens with the resort." Michael frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" Linda set her wineglass down, her hands clasped in her lap. "If, after the 6 months, you decide that this isn't what you want, there are other options. We can sell the resort. We could find a buyer who would keep the Wilson name alive, but you wouldn't have to carry the burden of running it yourself." Michael stared at her, stunned. He had never considered the possibility of selling the resort, not seriously. The idea of letting go of his family's legacy felt like a betrayal, but at the same time, the thought of continuing down this path filled him with doubt. "I'm not saying that's what you should do," Linda continued quickly, sensing his unease, "but I want you to know that you have options. This doesn't have to define your life if it's not what you want." Michael leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. He hadn't even completed his first month of the 6-month trial, and already his mother was offering him a way out. It was tempting, but it also made him feel like he was already failing. "I don't know, Mom," Michael said slowly. "I'm not ready to make any decisions yet." "Of course," Linda said, her voice soothing. "Take your time. Just know that whatever happens, I'm here for you." Michael nodded, though the weight of their conversation stayed with him long after he left the house. As he drove back to his small apartment near the resort, his thoughts churned. His mother had planted a seed of doubt in his mind, one that he hadn't considered before. What if he couldn't do this? What if he wasn't cut out for running the resort? But then another thought emerged. His father hadn't given him this challenge lightly. Robert Wilson had believed that Michael could rise to the occasion. Maybe the problem wasn't the job itself, but Michael's own fear of failure. The next day, as Michael returned to his duties, those thoughts lingered in the back of his mind. He pushed his cleaning cart through the resort's hallways, trying to focus on the task at hand, but his mother's words kept replaying in his head. "Or do you have options?" Michael had always thought of the resort as his destiny, something he was expected to take over when the time came. But now, with the weight of the responsibility pressing down on him, he wasn't sure if he wanted it. What would it mean to walk away? To sell the resort and let someone else take over? Could he live with that decision? As he worked, Michael crossed paths with Sophia again, who was finishing her shift at the cafe. She waved at him, her usual bright smile in place. "Hey, Mike, surviving another day?" Michael forced a smile. "Barely." Sophia laughed, leaning against the counter. "It gets easier, I promise. You just have to find your rhythm." "I hope so," Michael muttered, pushing his cart further down the hall. As he left Sophia behind, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was at stake. This wasn't just about surviving the 6 months or living up to his father's expectations. It was about figuring out who he really was and what he wanted out of life. But one thing was clear: selling the resort might be an option, but it wasn't the right one. Not yet, anyway. First, he had to see this through, no matter how hard it got. Michael stood in front of the large oak doors of his father's lawyer's office, his heart pounding in his chest. The reading of the will was something he had been dreading since the day his father, Robert Wilson, passed away. Everything had happened so suddenly. One day, his father was managing the resort with his usual charm and authority, and the next, he was gone. Michael took a deep breath and pushed the door open, stepping into the room. His mother, Linda, was already seated, her posture as perfect as ever, radiating poise and control. The lawyer, Mr. Harris, sat at his desk, shuffling through a stack of documents. There were no other family members present, a stark reminder that the Wilson family was small, just Michael and his mother now. "Michael, thank you for coming," Mr. Harris said, as he gestured for Michael to take a seat. Michael nodded, sitting down next to his mother. The tension in the room was palpable. He could feel Linda's eyes on him, and though she hadn't said much since they had spoken the night before, her expectations hung heavily in the air. She wanted him to take over the resort, to step into the role his father had left behind. But could he? "Let's begin," Mr. Harris said, his voice formal and measured. He opened the will and began to read, outlining the standard bequests, small donations to charities, a few personal items to close friends, and finally, the bulk of the estate, which included the Wilson Beach Resort. Michael leaned forward slightly, waiting for the inevitable, waiting to hear that the resort was now his. "And to my son, Michael Wilson, Mr. Harris continued, "I leave full ownership of the Wilson Beach Resort under one condition." Michael's heart skipped a beat. Condition. He hadn't expected that. Condition, Michael echoed, glancing at his mother. Linda looked just as confused, her eyebrows furrowing slightly. Mr. Harris adjusted his glasses and continued reading. "Michael, in order to inherit the resort, you must fulfill a requirement set by your father. You are to work as a janitor at the resort for a period of 6 months under an assumed identity. You are not to reveal your true role to any staff members or guests. Only after completing this 6-month period will you be granted full ownership of the resort." The words hung in the air like a heavy fog. Michael stared at Mr. Harris, struggling to process what he had just heard. "A janitor," he repeated, disbelief clear in his voice. "That's correct," Mr. Harris confirmed. "Your father specified that he wanted you to understand the inner workings of the resort from the ground up. He believed that true leadership comes from knowing every aspect of the business, including the roles of the people who keep it running." Michael leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. He had always known his father was a hands-on leader, the type of man who believed in hard work and humility. But this was a test, a challenge that Michael wasn't sure he was ready for. Linda finally spoke, her voice calm but tinged with surprise. "Robert never mentioned this to me." Mr. Harris nodded. "Your husband made it clear that he wanted Michael to have this experience before taking over the resort. He believed it would prepare him for the responsibilities that come with ownership." Michael ran a hand through his hair, his thoughts spiraling. He had expected to inherit the resort, sure, but not like this. The idea of spending 6 months cleaning floors, scrubbing bathrooms, and blending in with the staff was unthinkable. But what choice did he have? If he refused, the resort would be sold, and everything his father had built would be lost. "What happens if I don't do it?" Michael asked, already knowing the answer but needing to hear it out loud. "If you refuse," Mr. Harris said, "the resort will be placed under the management of a trustee, and after a period of time, it will be sold. The proceeds will go to various charities, as outlined in your father's will." Michael's chest tightened. He couldn't let that happen. The resort was his father's legacy. Selling it would be like letting a piece of his father disappear forever. But the thought of working as a janitor, of going unnoticed in the very place he was supposed to own, it was daunting. Linda placed a hand on his arm, her voice soft but firm. "Michael, your father believed in you. He wouldn't have set this challenge if he didn't think you could handle it." Michael looked at her, seeing the determination in her eyes. She wanted him to succeed. She needed him to take over, to carry on the Wilson name. But was he ready? Could he really do what his father had asked? After a long pause, Michael finally nodded. "All right, I'll do it." The next few days were a whirlwind of preparation. Michael had to meet with Mr. Harris privately to arrange the details of his new job. He would be working under the name Mike Harris, an alias provided by the lawyer, and only a few key people, including the resort's general manager, James Deuce, would be aware of the situation. Even then, James was instructed not to interfere with Michael's work as a janitor. The goal was for him to blend in, to experience the resort as the staff did, without the privileges of being the owner's son. Michael found himself standing in front of a mirror one morning, dressed in the plain, grey uniform of the resort's janitorial staff. It was a far cry from the tailored suits he usually wore to his corporate job in the city. He barely recognized himself. As he looked at his reflection, a flood of doubts washed over him. Could he really pull this off? Could he work as a janitor for 6 months, pretending to be someone else, while silently observing the resort's operations? And what would happen if he failed? He knew one thing for sure. This was no longer just about inheriting the resort. It was about proving something to himself, about living up to the expectations his father had placed on him. But more than that, it was about understanding the people who made the resort run, the workers who had been invisible to him for so long. On his first day as Mike Harris, Michael entered the staff entrance of the resort, his nerves on edge. The staff area was a stark contrast to the luxurious guest quarters. It was functional, with bare walls and fluorescent lighting, a reminder that the resort's glamour was reserved for the paying guests. Marquis, the head of janitorial services, was waiting for him. A gruff man in his early 50s, Mark had been with the resort for years, and he took his job seriously. "So, you're the new guy, huh?" Mark said, eyeing Michael with a mix of skepticism and mild curiosity. "Yeah," Michael replied, trying to sound casual. "Mike Harris, nice to meet you." Mark didn't bother shaking hands. "Let's get one thing straight," he said, his tone firm. "This job isn't glamorous, and it's not easy. You're here to work, not to make friends. Got it?" "Got it," Michael said, swallowing his pride. Mark handed him a set of keys and a checklist. "You'll start with the guest rooms on the south wing. Bathrooms need to be cleaned, trash taken out, floors mopped, don't cut corners." Michael nodded, accepting the keys and checklist. This was it. His new life had officially begun. As he made his way to the south wing, the weight of what lay ahead settled in. He wasn't just cleaning rooms, he was stepping into a new role, one that his father had carefully designed to test him. And as much as Michael hated the idea, a part of him understood why his father had done it. This wasn't just about the resort, it was about Michael discovering who he really was. Michael stood at the entrance of the south wing, holding the keys Mark had given him. The gravity of the situation was settling in with every passing minute. This wasn't just a task, it was his new reality for the next 6 months. No one in the resort knew who he really was, and that's how it had to stay. To claim the Wilson family legacy, he had to get through this challenge, day by day, without revealing his true identity. The south wing was a mix of luxury suites and standard guest rooms. Michael had stayed in these rooms plenty of times before, back when he was just the owner's son, free to enjoy the perks of the resort. But now, as Mike Harris, he was about to see them from a completely different perspective, the janitors. The checklist in his hand listed out tasks that felt simple but were grueling in practice. Clean the bathrooms, mop the floors, take out the trash, restock towels. He stared at the first room number on the list and took a deep breath before knocking. When no one answered, he used his key and stepped inside. The room was pristine, as expected. Whoever had stayed there had already checked out, leaving behind only the faint scent of sunscreen and ocean air. Michael set down his cleaning supplies and got to work. As he scrubbed the shower, a wave of discomfort hit him. The idea of cleaning up after someone else felt wrong, not because the work was beneath him, but because it was so different from what he was used to. But this was what his father had wanted. He could practically hear Robert's voice in his head, telling him that no job was beneath him, that leadership meant understanding every layer of the business. It wasn't just about running the numbers or making decisions from a corner office. It was about getting your hands dirty, literally. Hours passed, and by the time Michael finished his shift, his body ached in places he didn't know could ache. He made his way to the staff break room, feeling a strange mix of exhaustion and accomplishment. The break room was small and cramped, with faded chairs and a vending machine that looked like it hadn't been restocked in years. A few other workers were already sitting at the table, eating quietly. Michael grabbed a bottle of water and sat down, hoping to go unnoticed. But as soon as he sat, one of the employees, a tall guy named Eddie, glanced over at him. "New guy, huh?" Eddie said with a smirk. "Yeah, that's me," Michael replied, forcing a smile. Eddie leaned back in his chair, sizing Michael up. "You don't look like you've done much of this before." Michael chuckled awkwardly. "I guess I'm still getting the hang of it." Eddie raised an eyebrow, clearly not convinced. "Well, this place will chew you up and spit you out if you're not careful. Mark's a hard ass, but he's fair. As long as you pull your weight, you'll be fine." Michael nodded, appreciating the advice. "Thanks. I'll keep that in mind." As the conversation trailed off, Sophia entered the room, carrying a tray of used plates from the cafe. She spotted Michael and gave him a friendly wave. "How's your second day going, Mike?" she asked as she set the tray down. "Tiring," Michael admitted, rubbing his shoulder. "But I'm managing." Sophia laughed, her voice light and easy. "It gets better. Well, not really, but you get used to it." Her humor brought a small smile to Michael's face. Sophia had an energy about her that made things feel less overwhelming, even when they were. He appreciated that more than she knew. As she prepared to head back to the cafe, she paused by the door. "By the way, if you ever need a break from the grind, I usually hang out by the pool during lunch. The staff doesn't get to enjoy it much, but it's nice to look at once in a while." Michael gave a nod of thanks, watching her leave. Sophia was one of the few people who had made him feel somewhat welcome in this strange new role. It was a relief to have at least one ally, even if she had no idea who he really was. That evening, Michael collapsed onto the small bed in his modest apartment just off the resort grounds. It wasn't the spacious family estate he was used to, but it was part of the challenge, living like any other employee, without the privileges he had always taken for granted. As he stared up at the ceiling, his thoughts drifted back to his father. Why had Robert done this? Why make him go through this elaborate charade just to inherit the resort? Was it really about teaching him humility, or was there something deeper? Michael reached for his phone and scrolled through his contacts, stopping at his mother's name. He hadn't spoken to Linda since the day at the lawyer's office, but he knew she was watching him closely. She wanted him to succeed, to prove that he was worthy of the Wilson name. But what did he want? He put the phone down without calling and closed his eyes, exhaustion taking over. Tomorrow would be another long day. The next few weeks passed in a blur of hard work and quiet observation. Michael fell into a routine. Wake up early, clean the rooms, handle the trash, deal with the occasional grumbling guest who didn't even notice him. His body slowly adjusted to the physical demands of the job, but mentally, he was still grappling with the weight of his secret. One day, while cleaning one of the resort's larger suites, Michael noticed something strange. A clipboard with a list of inventory items sat on the bed, left behind by one of the other staff members. As he glanced at the list, something caught his eye. Several high-value items, like towels, electronics, and even mini-bar products, were marked as missing. Frowning, Michael picked up the clipboard. There were too many missing items for it to be just an oversight. It was odd, especially since the resort was known for its strict inventory controls. His father had always been meticulous about the way the business was run, and this kind of carelessness wouldn't have been tolerated. A sinking feeling settled in Michael's stomach. Was something wrong with the resort's management, or was it just bad luck that these items had disappeared? He couldn't be sure, but his instincts told him to pay attention. Later that day, he found himself sitting by the pool during his lunch break, just like Sophia had suggested. The cool breeze off the water helped clear his mind, but the unease from earlier lingered. Sophia appeared, carrying a sandwich and a drink. "Mind if I join you?" she asked. "Not at all," Michael replied, glad for the company. As they sat in comfortable silence, watching the guests lounge by the pool, Sophia glanced at him curiously. "You've been quiet lately. Everything okay?" Michael hesitated, unsure of how much to reveal. "I'm just trying to figure things out," he said carefully. "This place isn't exactly what I expected." Sophia nodded, her expression understanding. "Yeah, it's a lot more complicated than it seems, but I guess that's life, right? Nothing's ever as simple as it looks." Michael looked at her, feeling a strange sense of kinship. She was right. Nothing about this was simple. He wasn't just a janitor trying to get through the day. He was an heir, quietly assessing the resort, trying to figure out where he fit into all of it. And then there were the missing items. Something wasn't right. And Michael was beginning to think that his role as a janitor might give him the perfect vantage point to uncover whatever was going on. "Hey, Sophia," Michael said suddenly, his curiosity getting the better of him. "Have you ever noticed anything strange going on around here? Like things disappearing?" Sophia frowned, thinking for a moment. Disappearing? Like what? I don't know, Michael said, choosing his words carefully. I just noticed that some stuff seems to go missing every now and then. It could be nothing, but it feels weird. Sophia tilted her head, considering his words. Now that you mention it, I've heard some of the kitchen staff talk about supplies running short. It's not a huge deal, but people have noticed. Why? Michael shrugged, trying to play it off. Just something I came across. Probably nothing. But as they sat there, watching the waves crash against the shore in the distance, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a small inventory issue. Something deeper was happening at the resort, and as much as he wanted to focus on getting through his 6 months, he knew he couldn't ignore it. The days at the resort grew longer as Michael settled into his new role. But the weight of his father's challenge hung over him like a dark cloud. The work itself wasn't getting any easier, and Michael's body was sore from hours of scrubbing, mopping, and lifting. He had started to develop a rhythm, but no matter how hard he tried, there was always the looming sense that he didn't belong. The staff accepted him as Mike, the new janitor, but he was constantly aware of the hidden life he was leading. The biggest challenge, though, was not the physical labor, it was the mental strain of staying undercover. Michael's instincts as an heir to the resort kept colliding with his new reality as a low-level worker. He noticed things, small discrepancies, offhand comments, strange behavior among some of the staff, and it gnawed at him that he couldn't address them directly. His father's condition for the inheritance was clear. He had to observe, learn, and keep his true identity hidden. One morning, as Michael was cleaning the resort's main lobby, he spotted James, the general manager, walking briskly across the floor, his expression tense. James had been with the resort for years, and his father had trusted him implicitly. Yet Michael had begun to notice that James seemed different since Robert's passing, edgier, more secretive. There was a subtle but noticeable shift in the way James interacted with the staff. He wasn't as approachable as Michael remembered, and there were whispered rumors about decisions being made behind closed doors. As James passed, Michael glanced at him, their eyes meeting briefly. For a moment, Michael wondered if James suspected anything. The general manager had been informed of Michael's undercover role, but they had barely spoken since the arrangement began. Michael quickly looked away, not wanting to draw attention to himself, but the encounter left him unsettled. Later that day, Michael was assigned to clean one of the high-end suites reserved for VIP guests. The suite was on the top floor of the resort, offering breathtaking views of the ocean, and it was the kind of luxury that Michael used to take for granted. As he cleaned, his mind wandered back to the conversation he'd had with Sophia by the pool. The missing inventory items she'd mentioned, coupled with what he had seen on the clipboard, lingered in his thoughts. Something wasn't adding up, and the more he tried to brush it off, the more it nagged at him. While wiping down the bathroom counter, Michael's attention was drawn to the suite's minibar. He paused, his eyes narrowing as he noticed that several high-end bottles were missing. It wasn't unusual for guests to indulge, but the minibar had just been restocked the previous evening, according to the checklist he'd seen earlier. This wasn't just a case of a guest overindulging, something else was going on. Michael made a mental note to check the staff records later, but for now, he had to keep his head down. He couldn't afford to let his curiosity get the better of him, especially when he was still navigating the complexities of his secret role. That evening, as Michael sat in his small apartment, his phone buzzed with a text from his mother. Linda, I haven't heard from you in a while. How are things going? Michael stared at the message for a moment, the weight of his current reality making it hard to respond. He knew his mother wanted to hear that he was succeeding, that he was rising to the challenge his father had set. But the truth was far more complicated. He felt like an outsider in his own life, juggling the expectations of his family with the harsh reality of his new role. Michael, it's tough, but I'm managing. He sent the message and leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes. His thoughts drifted back to the resort, to the missing items, and to James. Something wasn't right, and the more time Michael spent at the resort, the more convinced he became that his father's legacy was at risk. The next day, Michael found himself working alongside Sophia again. She was cheerful as usual, but Michael could sense that she, too, had picked up on the subtle changes around the resort. As they worked together, he decided to test the waters and see how much she knew. "So," Michael began casually, wiping down a table, "you mentioned before that some supplies have been going missing. Have you heard anything more about that?" Sophia looked up from the stack of towels she was folding, her brow furrowed. "Yeah, actually, a few of the kitchen staff have been talking about it. It's not just small stuff either. High-end items, like the ones the VIP guests get, have been disappearing from the inventory. And not just once. This has been happening for a while." Michael nodded, his suspicion growing. "Does anyone know why?" Sophia shook her head. "Not really. But some people are starting to think there's more to it. I mean, this place is known for being strict about inventory control. For so much stuff to go missing without anyone noticing, it feels off." Michael's mind raced. He had thought the same thing. His father had built the resort with integrity, and this kind of mismanagement, or worse, potential theft, would have been completely unacceptable to him. But now, under James's management, it seemed like corners were being cut, or something more sinister was at play. "I don't know," Michael said, trying to sound nonchalant. "Maybe it's just bad luck, but it doesn't hurt to keep an eye on things." Sophia glanced at him, her eyes sharp. "Yeah, maybe, but I get the feeling that bad luck isn't the only thing going on here." Over the next few days, Michael's suspicions deepened. He began paying closer attention to the staff interactions, the inventory records, and the overall atmosphere at the resort. There was a tension beneath the surface, a sense that not everything was as it seemed. The more he observed, the more convinced he became that something was happening behind the scenes, something that threatened the integrity of the resort his father had worked so hard to build. One afternoon, while cleaning the staff locker room, Michael overheard a conversation between two employees. They were speaking in hushed tones, but Michael caught enough of the conversation to understand that they were talking about James. "I heard James has been making some deals under the table," one of them said, his voice low. "Stuff that isn't exactly legal." Michael froze, his heart pounding. Deals under the table? Could James be involved in something corrupt? It seemed far-fetched, but at the same time, Michael couldn't ignore the mounting evidence. The missing inventory, the strange behavior among the staff, and now this rumor about James. Everything was pointing towards something bigger. As Michael quietly left the locker room, his mind was racing. He had to figure out what was going on, but he couldn't risk blowing his cover. His father had trusted James with the resort, and if there was corruption involved, it would be a betrayal of everything Robert had stood for. That evening, Michael met up with Sophia after their shifts. They sat by the pool, the evening breeze carrying the scent of salt water and fresh linens. Michael knew he needed to confide in someone, and Sophia was the only person he could trust, at least partially. "Something's not right," Michael said, breaking the silence. Sophia glanced at him, her expression serious. "What do you mean?" "I think there's more going on with the missing inventory than we realize," Michael said cautiously, "and I think James might be involved." Sophia's eyes widened, but she didn't look entirely surprised. "And you think he's stealing from the resort?" Michael hesitated. "I don't know for sure, but I've heard things, people talking, and it doesn't add up." Sophia leaned back in her chair, thinking, "If that's true, then we have a big problem. James runs this place. If he's involved in something shady, it could bring the whole resort down." Michael nodded, feeling the weight of his responsibility growing. "That's what I'm afraid of." For the first time since taking on this undercover role, Michael felt like he was facing more than just a test of his character. He was facing a real threat to his family's legacy. And if he didn't figure out what was going on soon, everything his father had built could be destroyed, but he couldn't do it alone. He needed Sophia's help, and more importantly, he needed to find a way to expose whatever was happening without risking everything. The resort, once a symbol of Michael's carefree upbringing, was now a complex world of hidden agendas, power plays, and delicate balances. Working undercover had given him a new perspective, one that was far different from the polished view he had as the owner's son. As Mike Harris, the janitor, he saw the resort through the eyes of those who kept it running. And more importantly, he had begun to understand the deeper dynamics at play between the staff, the management, and the resort itself. Over the next few weeks, Michael became more integrated into the daily life of the staff. He was no longer just the new guy. He was one of them, at least on the surface. He worked long hours alongside them, scrubbing floors, cleaning guest rooms, and handling menial tasks without complaint. He noticed the rhythm of the resort, the ebb and flow of guests, the patterns of work that kept the place spotless and running smoothly. But as he got closer to the staff, he also started to see the fractures beneath the surface. One of the biggest surprises for Michael was how much he began to appreciate the workers' lives, their stories, and their dedication. People like Eddie, the janitor who had first sized him up, and Sophia, the waitress with dreams of becoming an accountant, weren't just names or faces anymore. They were real people with real struggles. They worked tirelessly to make the resort what it was, yet their contributions often went unnoticed by the upper management. As Michael continued his job, he couldn't shake the feeling that his father had wanted him to see exactly this. Robert Wilson had always been a hands-on leader, one who believed in respecting every member of his team, no matter their position. By forcing Michael into this role, Robert had ensured that his son would understand the value of hard work, not just as a concept, but as a lived experience. One evening, after finishing a long shift, Michael found himself back at the staff lounge with Sophia. The two had grown closer over the past few weeks, and while Michael still had to keep his identity hidden, he valued her insight and companionship more than he cared to admit. Sophia had a way of cutting through the nonsense and seeing things as they were, and Michael found himself relying on her perspective more and more. "Mike," she said one evening, handing him a soda as they sat down at one of the worn-out tables, "you've been here a while now. What do you think of the place?" Michael took a sip, trying to gather his thoughts. He couldn't exactly tell her the truth, but he wanted to be honest, at least to a degree. "It's different from what I expected. I thought it would be easier, just cleaning and doing basic stuff, but there's so much more to it. I'm starting to see how hard everyone works to keep this place going." Sophia smiled, nodding. "That's the thing most people don't get. The guests only see the surface, the clean rooms, the perfect meals, the beautiful views, but they don't see what it takes to make that happen. It's not glamorous, but it's real." Michael watched her as she spoke, appreciating her straightforwardness. "Yeah, I get that now." Sophia leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "But it's not just the work, There's also the stuff that goes on behind the scenes. And I don't just mean cleaning rooms. I'm talking about the management, the way things are run." Michael nodded, trying to draw her out further. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, then lowered her voice. "I've been hearing more about those missing supplies, and now people are saying it's not just food or drinks. There are rumors that bigger things are going missing: equipment, tools, even money." Michael felt his pulse quicken. He had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed by someone else made the situation feel even more real. "Do you think James knows about it?" he asked, keeping his tone casual. Sophia shrugged. "Hard to say. He's the one in charge, right? If something's happening, it's either with his approval or he's turning a blind eye. Either way, it's not good." Michael nodded thoughtfully, feeling the weight of what she was saying. His mind raced through the possibilities. If James was involved in some kind of theft or corruption, it could explain the strange behavior he'd noticed. But how could Michael investigate further without drawing suspicion? He was just a janitor. No one would listen to him if he tried to accuse James outright. Sophia's voice broke through his thoughts. "You okay? You look a little intense." Michael forced a smile, trying to shake off the tension. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just thinking, About what? About how much things have changed here. Sophia gave him a sympathetic look. You're not the only one. A lot of people have noticed. But no one wants to rock the boat, you know? We're just trying to keep our jobs and get through the day. Michael nodded, understanding the unspoken fear that lingered among the staff. They couldn't afford to challenge management, especially not someone as powerful as James. But Michael wasn't just a regular worker. He had a responsibility to protect the legacy his father had built, and that meant finding out the truth, no matter the cost. The next day, Michael's shift took him to the resort's maintenance department. It was a part of the resort he hadn't spent much time in, but he quickly realized how essential it was. The maintenance team was responsible for everything, from fixing broken equipment to ensuring the resort's infrastructure remained in top condition. As he worked alongside the maintenance staff, Michael noticed something odd. Several pieces of expensive equipment were missing. He asked one of the maintenance workers, Tom, about it casually. "Hey, what happened to the power tools that were here last week?" Tom frowned, glancing at the empty shelves. "That's a good question. A couple of us have been asking about that. The tools were checked out, but they haven't been returned. Management says they're being borrowed for a project, but no one seems to know where they are." Michael's suspicion deepened. It wasn't just the minibar items or the kitchen supplies. Something much larger was happening, and it was affecting every part of the resort's operations. Whoever was behind it was careful, covering their tracks just enough to avoid detection from the higher-ups. But for how long? As Michael continued his shift, he couldn't shake the feeling that James was involved. The general manager had the authority to approve inventory requests, manage budgets, and oversee operations. If there were missing items and money, James would be in a position to control or hide the details. But how could Michael prove it? He was still undercover, and any direct confrontation would blow his cover. He needed to gather evidence, something concrete that he could use to expose James without risking his position at the resort. That evening, Michael met up with Sophia again, this time at a small cafe just outside the resort. It was one of the few places where staff could go to relax without worrying about guests or management watching them. Sophia looked at him as they sat down, her eyes curious. "And you're still thinking about it, aren't you?" "Yeah," Michael admitted. "I can't let it go." She sighed, leaning forward. "Look, Mike, I get it. You want to figure out what's going on, but you have to be careful. If James really is involved in something shady, he's not going to let anyone expose him easily. And if you push too hard," Michael finished her sentence, "I could lose my job." "Exactly," Sophia said, her voice serious. "And I've seen it happen before. People who ask too many questions end up getting fired or transferred, and no one ever hears from them again." Michael nodded, the weight of her words settling in. He had to be strategic. Charging in without a plan could end in disaster, not just for him, but for the resort itself. He needed to play the long game, gather information, observe, and find the weak points in James's operation. But as he sat there with Sophia, watching the sun set over the horizon, Michael realized something else. He wasn't in this alone. Sophia had proven to be a valuable ally, and he knew that he could trust her. Together, they could uncover the truth, but they would have to be smart about it. "Thanks, Sophia," Michael said, his voice sincere. She smiled. "For what?" "For being someone I can trust." Her smile softened. "You can always trust me, Mike." As they sat in the fading light, Michael knew that the road ahead was only going to get more complicated, but he was ready. With Sophia by his side and the knowledge he was gaining from his undercover work, he had a chance to save the resort and expose James for who he really was. Michael's routine at the resort had become second nature. Every morning, he donned his janitor uniform and blended into the background, moving through the same hallways, cleaning the same rooms, and watching the guests and staff go about their lives. But now, with the growing suspicion that something more sinister was happening behind the scenes. His attention was focused not just on doing his job, but on gathering information. He needed to figure out how deeply the corruption ran and how much James, the general manager, Teej, was involved. The resort's employees, once just faces in the crowd, had become his focus. They were the ones who saw everything, the good, the bad, and the hidden. Michael knew that if anyone could help him unravel the mystery, it would be them. But he had to be careful. Asking too many questions could blow his cover and put him on James's radar. One afternoon, as Michael was cleaning the lobby, he saw Eddie, the janitor he had befriended, pushing a cart of supplies toward the back entrance. Eddie had been working at the resort for years, and while he wasn't one to gossip, Michael knew he had a lot of insight into how things operated behind closed doors. If there was anyone who might know something about the missing inventory or James's potential involvement, it would be Eddie. "Hey, Eddie," Michael called out, trying to keep his tone casual as he caught up with him. "Got a minute?" Eddie paused, wiping sweat from his forehead. "What's up, Mike?" Michael glanced around, making sure no one else was nearby before lowering his voice. "I've been noticing some weird things around here. Supplies going missing, equipment disappearing. You've been here a while. Is that normal?" Eddie raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by the question. "You're not the first to notice," he said, his tone cautious. "But it's best not to get involved, man. Trust me." Michael felt a pang of frustration. He needed more than vague warnings. He needed answers. "I get it. But if something's wrong, shouldn't we be doing something about it? What if it's hurting the resort?" Eddie shook his head, his expression hardening. "Look, Mike, you're new here. You don't know how things work. People who ask too many questions don't last long. I've seen good people lose their jobs because they stuck their nose where it didn't belong." Michael frowned. "So, we're just supposed to ignore it?" Eddie glanced over his shoulder, making sure no one else was listening before leaning in. "I'm saying you need to be smart. If something's going on, and I'm not saying it is, then it's happening way above our pay grade. You think management doesn't know? They're the ones running the show. You want to keep your job, keep your head down and do what you're told." With that, Eddie pushed his cart down the hall, leaving Michael standing there, more frustrated than before. It was clear that the staff knew something was wrong, but fear kept them silent. The threat of losing their jobs was enough to keep them in line, and it made Michael realize just how much control James had over the resort. Later that day, Michael met up with Sophia again during their lunch break. She had become a constant in his life at the resort, someone he could trust and talk to without worrying about his secrets slipping out. As they sat by the pool, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the water, Michael decided to share what he had learned from Eddie. "Sophia," he began, choosing his words carefully. "I talked to Eddie earlier. He mentioned that people who ask too many questions around here don't last long." Sophia looked at him, her expression serious. "Yeah, that sounds about right. It's not exactly a secret. People who try to stand up to James or management don't usually stick around for long. It's like there's this unspoken rule. You keep your mouth shut and you keep your job." Michael nodded, feeling the weight of her words. "I just don't understand how it got this bad. My dad, he wouldn't have let this happen." Sophia frowned, tilting her head slightly. "You talk about your dad a lot. Did he work in resorts too?" Michael paused, realizing he had let more slip than he intended. He was in the hospitality business," he said carefully. "He ran things differently. People trusted him." Sophia studied him for a moment, her eyes sharp. "That's rare these days. Most people in charge only care about the bottom line. If your dad was different, that's something to be proud of." Michael smiled weakly, appreciating her words but knowing he couldn't reveal the full truth. "Not yet. Thanks," he said quietly. "I just wish I could do something about what's happening here. It feels like everyone's afraid to speak up." Sophia leaned forward, her voice lowering. "There's a reason for that, Mike. James isn't just some manager. He's got connections. People don't cross him because they know he can make their lives difficult. And the worst part, no one really knows how deep it goes. There are rumors, sure, but no one's been able to prove anything. Michael's mind raced. If James was involved in something illegal, then it was only a matter of time before things spiraled out of control. But without evidence, there was nothing Michael could do. He needed to find a way to get proof, something concrete that would expose James and protect the resort. Sophia, Michael said, his tone more determined than before. I'm not sure how yet, but I'm going to figure this out. I can't just sit back and let James ruin this place. Sophia looked at him, her expression a mix of concern and admiration. Just be careful, okay? I don't want to see you get in trouble over this. Michael nodded. I will, but I can't let this go. Over the next few days, Michael kept a low profile, continuing his work as a janitor while subtly gathering more information. He started paying closer attention to the inventory logs, the comings and goings of the staff, and any unusual behavior from management. The more he observed, the more convinced he became that James was at the center of it all. One evening, while cleaning the administrative offices, Michael came across a stack of papers on one of the desks. The office belonged to Mark, the resort's head of maintenance. Michael knew Mark wasn't involved in the thefts. He was too honest, too dedicated to his job, but Mark's office was often used as a storage space for paperwork related to the resort's operations. And Michael hoped that he might find something useful. As he glanced over the documents, one sheet caught his attention. It was an inventory report, listing several expensive pieces of equipment that had been marked as lost or damaged beyond repair. Michael's brow furrowed as he noticed that many of these items had been reported missing recently, around the same time the rumors about James's shady dealings had started. He quickly took a photo of the report with his phone, knowing that this could be the lead he needed. If James was involved in theft or embezzlement, then this document could be part of the paper trail that led back to him. But he needed more than just one report. He needed to connect the dots. Michael knew he couldn't act alone. He needed someone who understood the resort's finances, someone who could help him dig deeper into the records without drawing attention. And there was only one person who fit that description: Sophia. The next day, Michael found Sophia in the cafe during her break. He approached her with a sense of urgency, knowing that time was running out. Sophia, I need your help, Michael said quietly, sitting down across from her. Sophia looked at him, her eyes widening slightly. What's going on? I think I found something. An inventory report that shows a bunch of expensive equipment listed as lost or damaged. But the timing doesn't add up. These items started disappearing right around the time people began talking about James. I need someone who knows their way around numbers to help me figure out if this is part of something bigger. Sophia's expression grew serious. You think James is involved? Michael nodded. I do, but I can't prove it alone. I need your help to go through the records, see if there's a pattern, something that links all of this together. Sophia hesitated for a moment, clearly weighing the risks. She knew that getting involved in something like this could jeopardize her job, her future at the resort, and even her safety if James was as dangerous as the rumors suggested. But Michael saw the determination in her eyes. He knew that she was the kind of person who wouldn't back down from doing the right thing, no matter the cost. All right, Sophia said finally, leaning in closer. I'll help you, but we have to be smart about this. If we get caught digging around, we could both lose our jobs, and worse. Michael nodded, feeling a surge of relief. He had expected her to agree, but the weight of the situation didn't lessen. I know. We'll be careful. I'll get you the report I found, and we can start going through the other records when it's safe. Sophia took a deep breath. We'll need access to the resort's financial logs, inventory records, and maybe even guest charges. If James is really behind this, there will be discrepancies somewhere. He can't cover everything. Michael glanced around the cafe, making sure no one was paying attention to them. We'll start tonight. After our shifts, That night, after the guests had retired to their rooms and the resort had quieted down, Michael and Sophia met in a small, unused office in the back of the resort. The dim light from the single desk lamp illuminated the documents Michael had gathered, casting long shadows on the walls. They had just a few hours before the night shift staff came through, so they needed to work quickly. Sophia sat at the desk, her eyes scanning the inventory reports, while Michael stood behind her, his mind racing. He knew this was risky, but he also knew that if they didn't take action now, James would continue to operate unchecked. "Look at this," Sophia said, pointing to a line on one of the reports. These items were marked as damaged or lost over the past few months, but the replacement costs are way higher than they should be. It's like someone inflated the prices and then the equipment just disappeared, Michael frowned. So, they're stealing the equipment and making money off the replacements. Maybe. Or they're selling the original items and pocketing the replacement funds, Sophia said, flipping through the pages quickly. It's hard to tell exactly what's going on just from these reports, but something is definitely wrong. Michael leaned over the desk, staring at the numbers. It was starting to make sense. The missing equipment, the inflated costs, the rumors among the staff. James had access to all the financial records and the authority to approve these transactions without raising suspicion. But how was he getting away with it? James must have people helping him, Michael said, thinking out loud. There's no way he's doing all this on his own. Sophia nodded. Exactly, but we need more proof. These reports are a start, but we need to dig deeper into the financials. If we can find a link between the inflated costs and where the money is going, we'll have a case. Michael felt a mixture of hope and dread. They were close to uncovering the truth, but they were also walking a dangerous line. If James found out what they were doing, there was no telling how far he would go to protect himself. "We can't stop now," Michael said, his voice resolute. "We need to keep digging. I'll find a way to get access to the financial logs without raising suspicion." Sophia looked up at him, her eyes serious. "We're in this together, Mike, but we have to be careful. James isn't the kind of guy who plays fair. If he senses we're onto him." Michael knew what she was implying. James could make their lives hell if he found out they were investigating him, but Michael had come too far to back down now. This wasn't just about the resort anymore. It was about his father's legacy, about the people who worked there, and about doing what was right. "I know the risks," Michael said, his jaw set, "but we don't have a choice. If we don't stop him, no one will." The following days were tense. Michael and Sophia continued to meet in secret, slowly piecing together more evidence of James's involvement in the theft and corruption that had infiltrated the resort. They worked quietly, careful not to draw attention to themselves, but the closer they got to the truth, the more dangerous it became. Michael kept a low profile, going through the motions of his janitorial duties while watching James's every move. He couldn't confront him yet, not without concrete proof, but the day was coming. He could feel it. One afternoon, as Michael was cleaning one of the guest suites, he overheard a conversation between James and one of the resort's suppliers. He was in the hallway outside the suite, scrubbing the floor, when James's voice carried through the slightly open door of the office. "I don't care what it costs," James was saying, his tone sharp. "Just make sure the shipment is delivered on time. I'll take care of the rest." Michael froze, his hand tightening on the mop handle. A shipment? What was James talking about? "We've got people asking questions," James continued, his voice lower now. "I need this to go off without a hitch, understand?" Michael's heart pounded in his chest. He needed to know more, but he couldn't risk getting caught eavesdropping. Slowly, he moved down the hallway, his mind racing. James was planning something, and whatever it was big. That evening, Michael met with Sophia once again. They sat in the same small office, poring over the latest financial records Sophia had managed to access. "There's something happening soon," Michael said quietly, explaining what he had overheard. "James is expecting a shipment. I don't know what it is, but it's important to him." Sophia looked concerned. "If he's expecting something, It could be the final piece of the puzzle. If we can find out what it is and track it, we might have enough to bring him down. Michael nodded. But we need to move fast. We don't have much time. The night of the shipment came faster than they expected. Michael and Sophia worked quickly, tracking the delivery and gathering as much evidence as they could without being noticed. As the pieces started to fall into place, they realized just how deep James's corruption went. He had been siphoning money from the resort for months, using fake inventory replacements and inflated costs to fund his personal schemes. And the shipment he was expecting, it was a key part of his operation, something that could finally expose him. As Michael and Sophia prepared to confront James with the evidence, they knew the stakes were higher than ever. This wasn't just about uncovering theft anymore, it was about saving the resort from being destroyed from the inside out. But Michael couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. James had been too careful, too calculated, and if they weren't careful, they could lose everything. The tension in the air at the Wilson Beach Resort was palpable. Michael had spent days carefully navigating his undercover role, but now everything felt more urgent. With each piece of evidence he and Sophia uncovered, the puzzle of James's corruption grew clearer, but so did the risks. As the night of the mysterious shipment loomed, Michael knew they were inching closer to exposing James, but they were also walking a razor-thin line. That evening, Michael returned to the resort after his shift, meeting Sophia in their usual spot, the small office tucked away behind the administrative wing. Sophia had a stack of papers in front of her, her eyes scanning through them with laser focus. Her usual easygoing demeanor was replaced with something more serious. There was a sense that they were no longer just investigating minor thefts. This was something bigger, something that could bring down James's entire operation. "I found something," Sophia said quietly as Michael entered the room. She handed him a piece of paper. "It's a log of transactions made over the past few months. But look here." She pointed to a line that listed an equipment purchase for an exorbitant amount of money. This is what James claimed was used for the replacement of damaged goods, but the equipment never showed up. The money, it was funneled into a private account. Michael's eyes narrowed as he read the document. It was all there, the fake purchases, the inflated costs, and the money being moved into hidden accounts. James had been using the resort's resources to line his own pockets for months, if not years. "This is it," Michael muttered, a sense of satisfaction mingled with anxiety. "This is the proof we need." Sophia nodded, but her face remained tense. "It's enough to expose him, but we need to be careful. If James gets wind of this, he'll destroy everything before we can act. We have to be smart about how we use this information." Michael agreed, knowing that confronting James directly wasn't an option, at least not yet. They needed a strategy. They had to gather enough evidence and then bring it to someone who could act without tipping James off. But who could they trust? That night, Michael returned to his apartment, his mind racing with possibilities. His father had trusted James for years, so the idea of betraying that trust didn't sit easily with Michael. But the reality was that James had betrayed them first. His father, the resort, the employees who worked tirelessly to keep the place running. There was no choice but to stop him before the damage became irreversible. Michael had spent enough time with the resort staff to see how much they depended on the stability of the business. People like Eddie and Sophia weren't just employees, they were the lifeblood of the resort. If James's corruption continued, it would only be a matter of time before everything his father had built came crashing down. As he lay in bed, unable to sleep, Michael's phone buzzed. It was a text from Linda, his mother. "Linda, I know you've been working hard, but don't forget to take care of yourself. Your father would be proud of how much you're stepping up." Michael stared at the message, his chest tightening. His mother didn't know the half of what was happening, and he wasn't sure he could tell her yet. She still saw the resort as the family's legacy, a legacy that Michael was supposed to inherit and protect. But protecting it now meant confronting hard truths and potentially bringing everything to light. The next morning, Michael returned to the resort for what felt like another routine day. He was assigned to clean the administrative offices again, the same place where he and Sophia had discovered the questionable financial logs. As he entered the office, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The office was quiet, too quiet. Normally, there was at least a few staff members bustling around, filing paperwork or taking calls, but today, the office was empty, the air still. As Michael pushed his cart toward the back, he noticed that the door to James's office was slightly ajar. He hesitated, unsure if he should go inside. He had never been in James's office before, not as Mike the janitor, and certainly not as the resort's true heir. But the door being open felt like an invitation, or maybe a trap. After a moment's pause, Michael stepped inside. The office was neatly organized, papers stacked methodically on James's desk. It looked like any other office, but Michael's instincts told him there was more to it than met the eye. As he scanned the room, something caught his attention. On the far side of the office, there was a small filing cabinet that didn't quite match the rest of the decor. It was old, worn, and clearly out of place in the otherwise polished space. Michael's curiosity got the better of him, and he approached the cabinet, pulling open the top drawer. Inside were stacks of files, each labeled with a different month. As Michael flipped through the papers, he realized they were records, detailed records of transactions, payments, and equipment purchases. But something wasn't right. The numbers didn't add up. There were large sums of money moving in and out of accounts that didn't correspond with the resort's legitimate expenses. His pulse quickened as he pulled out a folder marked with the current month. Inside were more documents, this time detailing the shipment that James had been expecting. It wasn't equipment or supplies for the resort. It was something far more valuable: cash. The shipment was a front, a way for James to launder the money he had been stealing from the resort. Michael quickly snapped pictures of the documents with his phone, knowing that this was the final piece of the puzzle. With these records, they could prove beyond a doubt that James was involved in illegal activity. But as he closed the filing cabinet and prepared to leave the office, the door creaked open. Michael's heart stopped. James stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "What are you doing in here?" James asked, his voice calm but with an edge that sent a chill down Michael's spine. Michael thought fast, holding up the cleaning supplies in his hand. "Just cleaning. The door was open, so I figured I'd start in here." James stared at him for a long moment, his eyes scanning the room. Michael could feel the tension building, but he kept his face neutral, hoping that James would believe his cover. "Finish up and get out," James said finally, his tone clipped. "I don't want anyone in here unless I say so." Michael nodded, his heart racing as he quickly gathered his supplies and left the office. He could feel James's eyes on him the whole time, and as soon as he was out of sight, he let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. He had the evidence, but James was starting to suspect something. Michael couldn't afford to make any more mistakes. They were running out of time. That night, Michael and Sophia met in secret again. He showed her the pictures he had taken of the documents in James's office, and as she flipped through them on his phone, her eyes widened. "This is it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is everything we need to take James down." Michael nodded, his mind racing with the possibilities. They had the evidence now, but they needed to act fast before James realized they were onto him. "What do we do next?" Sophia asked, her voice tinged with both excitement and fear. Michael thought for a moment, weighing their options. They couldn't go to the police yet, not without solid proof that the money was being laundered through legitimate channels, and they couldn't confront James directly, not without risking everything. "We need to find out where that shipment is going," Michael said finally. "If we can trace it to James's accounts, we'll have everything we need." Sophia nodded, determination flashing in her eyes. "I'll start tracking it, but we have to be careful. If James realizes we're onto him," Michael finished her thought, "he'll bury us." They both knew the risks, but as they sat there, the weight of what they were doing settled in. This wasn't just about exposing corruption, it was about saving the resort, protecting the people who worked there, and preserving the legacy that Michael's father had built. "We're in this together," Michael said, meeting Sophia's gaze. She smiled, though there was a flicker of anxiety in her eyes. "Yeah, together." As they prepared for the next step in their plan, Michael knew one thing for certain. They were about to face the biggest challenge yet. But with Sophia by his side, he felt more determined than ever to see it through. They had come too far to turn back now. The evidence Michael and Sophia had gathered felt like a ticking time bomb. They had the missing pieces, the fake inventory logs, the laundered money, and the looming shipment. All signs pointed to James being at the center of the corruption, but now they needed to play it smart. Exposing him prematurely could lead to disastrous consequences, and Michael knew they had to wait for the right moment to strike. The resort seemed almost oblivious to the storm brewing behind the scenes. Guests laughed and sipped cocktails by the pool, and the staff carried on with their usual routines, unaware that everything could come crashing down at any moment. But for Michael, every shift felt more dangerous. James had started to watch him more closely, and the slightest misstep could blow his cover. He could feel the pressure mounting. Sophia had been working in the background, using her knowledge of accounting to track the money flow. Her meticulous attention to detail was invaluable, but it also put her at risk. If anyone discovered what they were doing, their jobs and possibly their lives would be in jeopardy. It was late one evening when Michael and Sophia finally tracked down where the shipment was headed. They had gathered in the same small office they'd used before, the dim light casting long shadows across the room. Sophia sat in front of her laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she pieced together the final part of the puzzle. "Okay, here it is," Sophia said, turning the screen toward Michael. "The shipment is being routed through a company called Oceanic Supplies. It's a front, just like we suspected. They're receiving the goods, but the money is being funneled into James's personal accounts through fake invoices." Michael leaned over, scanning the screen. It was all there in black and white, proof that James had been using the resort as a cover for his illegal activities. His father's resort, the place that had been built on trust and integrity, was being used for criminal schemes. Michael's stomach churned with anger and disbelief. "This is it," Michael muttered, his voice low but steady. "We can take this to the authorities. It's more than enough to bring him down." Sophia looked up at him, her face etched with concern. "It's risky, though. James has people on the inside. If we don't handle this the right way, he could cover his tracks and make us look like the criminals." Michael knew she was right. James had connections, and he wasn't the type to go down without a fight. They had to be strategic, find someone outside the resort, someone they could trust to take this information to the police or a higher authority without tipping James off. "We need to find someone," Michael said, pacing the room. "Someone who isn't connected to the resort, but has the authority to act on this." Sophia tapped her chin, thinking, "What about your mum? She still has some influence with the board, doesn't she?" Michael froze at the suggestion. His mother, Linda, had been kept in the dark about everything. She still believed in the image of the resort that his father had built, an honest, well-run business. Telling her the truth about what was happening would shatter that illusion. But Sophia was right. Linda had connections, and she might be their only chance to expose James without tipping him off. "I don't know," Michael said hesitantly. "If we bring her into this, it'll destroy her. She's still grieving for my father." Sophia's expression softened. "I get it, Mike, but this is bigger than us now. If James isn't stopped, he'll ruin everything your dad built. Your mom would want to know the truth." Michael sighed, running a hand through his hair. He knew Sophia was right, but the thought of breaking his mother's heart was almost unbearable. Still, they had no choice. James had to be stopped, and Linda might be the only person who could help them. The next day, Michael made the difficult decision to tell his mother everything. He hadn't been back to the family home since his father's funeral, but now he found himself standing at the doorstep, his heart pounding in his chest. The sprawling estate felt cold and empty without his father's presence, and Michael hesitated before ringing the doorbell. Linda answered the door, her face lighting up when she saw him. "Michael, it's been too long. I've missed you." Michael forced a smile, but the weight of what he was about to tell her hung heavy in the air. "I've missed you too, Mom. We need to talk." Linda led him into the living room, where they sat down by the large bay windows overlooking the garden. Michael could see the concern in her eyes. She knew something was wrong. "What is it, Michael? You look troubled." Michael took a deep breath, his hands clenched in his lap. "Mom, there's something going on at the resort. Something bad." Linda frowned, her brow furrowing in confusion. "What do you mean? The resort's been doing well, hasn't it? I haven't heard anything from James." Michael swallowed hard, feeling the words catch in his throat. "That's the problem. It's James. He's been using the resort to cover up illegal activities, money laundering, theft, you name it. He's been stealing from us, from Dad's legacy." For a moment, Linda just stared at him, her expression frozen in disbelief. What are you talking about, Michael? That can't be true." "It is, Mom," Michael said quietly, pulling out his phone and showing her the pictures of the documents he and Sophia had gathered. "We've been investigating it for weeks. This is the proof." Linda's hands trembled as she took the phone, her eyes scanning the evidence. As she read through the records, her face paled and she shook her head in denial. "No, this can't be happening. James, your father trusted him." "I know," Michael said softly, "but he's been betraying that trust for a long time." Linda's eyes filled with tears as she set the phone down, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "How could this happen? How could I have been so blind?" "It's not your fault," Michael reassured her, placing a hand on her arm. "James has been covering his tracks. He's good at hiding the truth, but now we know, and we can stop him." Linda wiped her eyes, taking a deep breath as she composed herself. "What do we do now?" Michael hesitated, knowing how difficult the next part would be. "We need your help. You still have connections with the board, with people who can take this to the police without tipping James off. We need to act quickly, before he realizes what we've found." Linda nodded, her resolve hardening. "I'll make some calls, but Michael, this will destroy the resort's reputation. If this gets out, it'll be a scandal." "I know," Michael said quietly, "but if we don't stop James, he'll destroy everything anyway." Linda sat in silence for a long moment, staring out the window as the gravity of the situation settled in. Finally, she stood, her expression resolute. "I'll do what needs to be done. Your father would never have let this go on, and neither will I." Over the next few days, Linda worked behind the scenes, using her connections to discreetly gather support. She contacted members of the resort's board, people she trusted, and began laying the groundwork for a formal investigation. Michael and Sophia continued to gather more evidence, preparing for the day when they would confront James and bring everything to light. But the tension was growing. Michael could feel it every time he walked through the resort. James had become more erratic, his temper flaring at the smallest inconveniences. He was starting to sense that something was wrong, and Michael knew they were running out of time. Then one evening, as Michael was finishing his shift, he received a call from Linda. "Michael," she said, her voice urgent, "I've arranged a meeting with the board. We're going to confront James tomorrow." Michael's heart raced. Tomorrow. It was happening. After weeks of planning and investigating, they were finally going to expose James for the fraud he was. "Are you ready for this?" Linda asked, her voice filled with both hope and fear. Michael took a deep breath. "I'm ready." The next morning, Michael, Sophia, and Linda arrived at the resort together. The board members were already waiting in one of the private meeting rooms, and the tension in the air was thick. James had no idea what was coming, but by the end of the day, his reign of corruption would be over. As they entered the room, Michael couldn't help but glance at his mother. She looked composed, but he could see the pain in her eyes. This was the resort she had built with her husband, the legacy they had worked so hard to protect. And now they were about to tear it apart in order to save it. James arrived a few minutes later, oblivious to the storm that was about to hit him. He greeted the board members with his usual charm, but as soon as he saw Michael, his smile faltered. "What's going on?" James asked, his eyes narrowing. Linda stood, her voice cold and authoritative. "James, we need to talk. Sit down." James hesitated, clearly sensing the shift in the room. But he complied, sitting down at the head of the table as the board members exchanged glances. Michael could feel the tension rising, his heart pounding in his chest. Linda didn't waste any time. "We know what you've been doing, James. We have the evidence." James's face paled, his eyes darting between Michael and Linda. "I don't know what you're talking about. You've been stealing from the resort," Michael said, his voice steady but filled with anger. "Laundering money, inflating costs, using fake companies to funnel money into your own accounts. It's all here." He slid the folder of documents across the table. James glanced at the folder but didn't reach for it. His expression hardened, and for the first time, Michael saw the man behind the facade, the ruthless, calculating criminal who had been manipulating them all. "You think you can bring me down with this?" James sneered. "I've covered my tracks. No one will believe you. We have enough evidence to put you away for a long time," Sophia said, her voice calm but firm, "and the police are already involved. It's over, James." For a long moment, James just sat there, his expression unreadable. Then, without warning, he stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You have no idea what you've just done," James spat, his voice filled with venom. "I've built this place. I made it what it is. Without me, it'll crumble." Michael stood his ground. "You didn't build anything, my father did, and now we're going to fix what you've tried to destroy." James glared at them, his hands clenched into fists. For a moment, it looked like he might lash out, but then he turned on his heel and stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him. The room fell into stunned silence. Michael felt a wave of relief wash over him, but he knew it wasn't over yet. There was still so much to do: legal battles, rebuilding trust, and salvaging the resort's reputation. But for now, they had won the first battle. Linda placed a hand on Michael's shoulder, her voice soft. "Your father would be proud of you." Michael nodded, his throat tight with emotion. He had done what needed to be done, and now it was time to rebuild together. The morning after James stormed out of the board meeting, a sense of unease settled over the resort. Though James's reign of corruption had been brought to light, the aftermath of his downfall was just beginning. Michael knew that exposing James was only the first step in a long process of rebuilding the resort's trust, reputation, and finances. There was still a storm to weather, and now he, along with his mother and Sophia, had to navigate it carefully. Word spread quickly among the staff that James had been confronted by the board, but the details were kept under wraps. The employees sensed that something major had happened, but most of them didn't know how deeply James's corruption had affected the resort. For now, all eyes were on Michael. Michael had returned to the resort under a new light. No longer just the janitor, his real identity as the son of the owner, now the heir to the Wilson Beach Resort, was slowly becoming known among the staff. But with that revelation came questions, uncertainty, and in some cases, resentment. Many of the employees, especially those who had suffered under James's management, were wary of what the future held. That morning, Michael found himself standing in the lobby, watching the guests mill about as if nothing had changed. The resort was still a beautiful, bustling place, but beneath the surface, the foundations had been shaken. As he stood there, Sophia appeared at his side, her face set with determination. "How are you holding up?" she asked, her voice quiet but steady. Michael shrugged, his thoughts swirling. "I don't know yet. It's all happening so fast. We stopped James, but now we have to pick up the pieces." Sophia nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "The staff is nervous. They know something's up, but no one's saying anything. And I'm hearing rumors. People think the resort is in trouble." Michael sighed. He had been expecting this. The moment James was ousted, the resort's inner workings were laid bare, and now everyone was wondering if the business could survive the scandal. "We need to get ahead of this," Michael said firmly. "We can't let the staff or the guests think the resort is falling apart. If we lose their trust, we lose everything." Sophia gave him a reassuring smile. "We'll figure it out. But you're right, we need to address this before the rumors spiral out of control." Later that day, Michael and Linda called an emergency staff meeting. The employees gathered in the resort's conference room, their faces a mixture of confusion and concern. Michael stood at the front of the room, his mother by his side. It was the first time he had addressed the staff as their new leader, and the weight of the responsibility felt heavier than ever. Linda opened the meeting with a brief introduction, her voice calm and authoritative. She explained that changes were coming, but reassured the staff that the resort was still standing strong. Then she handed the floor to Michael. Michael took a deep breath, scanning the room. He saw Eddie, Mark, and other familiar faces among the crowd. People who had once been his colleagues now looked at him differently, knowing that he was no longer just Mike the janitor. "I know you've all heard rumors," Michael began, his voice steady but sincere, "and I know that the last few days have been difficult. But I want to be honest with all of you. This resort has been through a lot recently, and there have been things happening behind the scenes that shouldn't have been happening." A murmur ran through the crowd, but Michael held up a hand to quiet them. "James has been removed from his position," Michael continued, his tone firm. "He was involved in activities that compromised the integrity of this resort. My father built this place on trust and respect, and James violated that trust, but we're not going to let that define us." Michael could feel the tension in the room as the staff absorbed the news. Some looked relieved, while others were clearly worried about what this meant for their jobs. "I want to assure you all that the resort is not going anywhere," Michael said, his voice rising with conviction. "We're going to rebuild, and we're going to do it together. No one is losing their jobs, and we're committed to making sure that this place thrives again, but it's going to take all of us, every single one of you, to make that happen." There was a long pause as the staff processed his words. Then, slowly, Eddie stood up from the back of the room. "Mike," he started, but then corrected himself. "Michael, what happens next? I mean, with everything that's come out, are we still going to be able to keep the resort running?" Michael nodded, his eyes scanning the room. "Yes, we are. We've already started putting new systems in place to fix what James broke. We're going to be more transparent, more efficient, and more focused on what really matters, the guests and the people who work here. But it's going to take time." The staff murmured their agreement, and Michael felt a small wave of relief. This was only the beginning, but at least they were moving in the right direction. Over the next few days, Michael and Linda worked tirelessly to stabilize the resort. They met with board members, suppliers, and financial experts to assess the damage James had done and put a plan in place for recovery. It wasn't easy. The financial strain caused by James's theft was significant, and there were legal battles ahead. But they were determined to save the resort, no matter the cost. Sophia had been a constant source of support, working alongside Michael to help rebuild the resort's finances. Her skills in accounting had proven invaluable, and Michael was grateful to have her by his side. But as they spent more time together, Michael realized that their partnership had grown into something more. One evening, after a particularly long day of meetings and financial planning, Michael and Sophia found themselves alone in the office. The sun had long since set, and the resort was quiet, save for the distant sound of waves crashing against the shore. Sophia looked up from her laptop, stretching her arms. "I think we've done all we can for tonight." Michael nodded, leaning back in his chair. "Yeah, I think you're right." There was a brief silence between them, the air thick with unspoken tension. Michael had been avoiding the growing feelings he had for Sophia, unsure of how to balance their professional and personal relationship. But now, in the quiet of the office, with everything they had been through, the lines between the two felt more blurred than ever. Sophia caught his eye, her expression softening. "You know, Michael, you've handled all of this really well. I don't know how you've managed to keep it together." Michael smiled, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. "I had help. I couldn't have done any of this without you." Sophia's cheeks flushed slightly, and she looked down at her hands. "I'm just doing my job." "No," Michael said quietly, standing up and moving closer to her. "You've done more than that. You've been there for me when I didn't know who else I could trust. You've risked your job, your future, to help me save this place. That means more to me than you know." Sophia looked up at him, her eyes searching his. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, without thinking, Michael closed the distance between them, gently placing a hand on her cheek. "I couldn't have done this without you," he whispered. Sophia's breath hitched, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned into his touch, her eyes closing for a brief moment before opening again, full of emotion. "Michael," she began, but before she could say more, he leaned in and kissed her. The kiss was soft and tentative at first, but it quickly deepened as they both gave in to the feelings they had been holding back for so long. In that moment, the weight of the resort, the scandals, the corruption, all of it faded away, leaving only the two of them. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Sophia looked up at him with a mixture of surprise and affection. "What does this mean?" she asked softly. Michael smiled, his hand still gently resting on her face. "It means that we've been through a lot together, and I don't want to lose you." Sophia smiled back, her eyes glistening. "You won't." The next day, as Michael prepared for another round of meetings, he couldn't help but feel a sense of hope. There was still so much work to do, and the challenges ahead were daunting, but for the first time in weeks, he felt like they were on the right path. He glanced out the window at the resort, the place his father had built from the ground up, and knew that they would make it through this. Together, Michael stood in his office the next morning, staring out at the resort's pristine beach, waves crashing gently against the shore. The sky was a clear, brilliant blue, but the storm he was facing was far from over. Exposing James had been the easy part. The real challenge was now repairing the resort's reputation, stabilizing its finances, and earning back the trust of the staff and guests. There was no doubt about it. This was going to be a long, uphill battle. Behind him, his mother, Linda, sat at the desk, reviewing a list of tasks they needed to address. The resort was operational, but there were cracks in the foundation, both literal and metaphorical. Linda had thrown herself into the task of rebuilding the business, determined to protect the legacy her late husband had left behind. Her strength during this time had been a guiding force for Michael, but he could tell that the weight of it all was starting to show in her eyes. "We need to release a public statement," Linda said, glancing up from her notes. "And the board wants to address the guests directly. Reassure them that we're handling the situation and that their experiences won't be affected." Michael nodded, running a hand through his hair. "I agree. But we need to be careful about how much we reveal. We don't want to incite panic." "Exactly," Linda replied. "The guests don't need to know every detail. They just need to trust that we're still in control." Michael's phone buzzed, and he glanced down at the message. It was from Sophia. "Sophia, ready for the meeting in an hour." Sophia had been by his side through every step of this process, and her unwavering support had become a source of comfort. The kiss they had shared the night before had changed things between them, but they hadn't had the chance to talk about it yet. There was too much going on, and Michael wasn't sure how to balance his growing feelings for her with the responsibilities of saving the resort. He replied quickly, keeping it professional. "Michael, I'll be there. Thanks for everything." Linda stood up, closing her notebook and giving Michael a gentle look. "You're doing great, Michael. I know this isn't easy, but your father would be proud of the way you've stepped up." Michael's chest tightened at her words. He had been thinking a lot about his father lately, wondering if he was living up to the expectations his father had set for him. "Thanks, Mom. I just hope I'm doing the right thing." "You are," Linda said firmly. "This resort is in good hands." An hour later, Michael and Sophia met in the conference room with the board members and key staff. The atmosphere was tense. Everyone knew that the fallout from James's corruption could be disastrous if not handled properly. The staff was concerned about their jobs. The board was worried about the resort's financial stability, and Michael was focused on making sure the truth was revealed in a controlled, strategic way. Sophia sat next to Michael, her laptop open as she prepared to present the updated financial plan they had been working on. She had been instrumental in helping him sort through the mess James had left behind, identifying areas where the resort could cut costs without sacrificing quality, and implementing new systems for transparency and accountability. Michael couldn't have asked for a better partner in this endeavor. "Let's get started," Michael said, addressing the room. "We have a lot to go over, but the main priority is stabilizing the resort's finances and regaining the trust of both the guests and the staff." Sophia stood and began her presentation, walking the board through the financial recovery plan. She detailed the changes they were making to prevent further fraud, the cost-cutting measures they were implementing to manage the resort's debts, and the long-term strategies for bringing in new business. Michael watched her as she spoke, impressed by her poise and clarity. She had a way of making complicated numbers and concepts seem manageable, and the board members were visibly reassured by her confidence. As the presentation continued, one of the board members, Mr. Daniels, raised his hand. "What about the staff?" he asked. "There's been a lot of turnover since James's tenure. Are we confident that we have the right people in place to lead this recovery?" Michael nodded. "That's a valid concern. I've been working closely with the department heads, and we've already identified areas where we need to bring in new talent. But I want to make something clear. The staff we have now are dedicated to this resort. Many of them have been here for years, and they know this place better than anyone. We're going to rely on their experience and knowledge as we move forward." There were murmurs of agreement from the board, but Michael could sense their underlying worry. He couldn't blame them. James's leadership had left scars, and some of those wounds would take time to heal, but he was determined to show them that he could guide the resort through this crisis. After the meeting, Michael and Sophia stayed behind to go over a few more details. The room was quiet, the tension from earlier still hanging in the air, but now there was a sense of progress. They were taking the right steps, and slowly, the pieces were starting to fall into place. "You were amazing in there," Michael said, leaning back in his chair. "I don't think we'd be making half this progress without you." Sophia smiled, but there was a hint of uncertainty in her expression. "I'm just doing my part, but there's still a long way to go." "I know," Michael replied, his tone softening, "but we'll get there." There was a brief silence between them, the weight of unspoken words lingering. Finally, Sophia broke the tension. "About last night." Michael's heart skipped a beat. He'd been waiting for this conversation, but now that it was happening, he wasn't sure what to say. "Yeah," he said cautiously, meeting her gaze. "And about that?" Sophia hesitated, her cheeks flushing slightly. "I don't want things to get complicated between us, Michael. We've been working so well together, and the last thing I want is to mess that up." Michael nodded, understanding her hesitation. "I don't want that either, but—" He paused, searching for the right words. "I don't want to ignore what's happening between us. I've felt it for a while now, and I think you have too." Sophia's eyes softened, and she looked down at her hands. "I have, but this isn't the right time, is it? There's so much going on, and the last thing we need is a distraction." Michael exhaled slowly, leaning forward. "You're not a distraction, Sophia. If anything, you've been the thing keeping me focused." She looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mix of emotions. "Michael, we both know how complicated this is. You're running the resort now. You're trying to save it. I don't want to get in the way." "You're not in the way," Michael said firmly. "You're part of this. I don't think I could do it without you." For a moment, they sat in silence, the weight of their feelings hanging in the air between them. Then, Sophia gave him a small, tentative smile. "Okay," she said softly. "We'll take it slow. One step at a time." Michael smiled back, relieved. One step at a time. The following weeks were filled with endless meetings, late-night planning sessions, and difficult decisions. But slowly, things began to improve. The resort's finances stabilized, new systems were put in place to prevent any future corruption, and the staff, once wary and uncertain, started to trust in Michael's leadership. The guests continued to visit, and word of the resort's recovery began to spread. Michael worked tirelessly to ensure that everything ran smoothly, but he never lost sight of the bigger picture. This resort wasn't just a business, it was his family's legacy, and it was filled with people like Eddie, Mark, and Sophia, who had become part of his extended family. Every night, after a long day of work, Michael found himself thinking about his father. He hoped that Robert Wilson would be proud of the way he was handling things, even though it felt like there was still so much to do. But as each day passed, Michael became more confident that he was on the right path. One evening, after another long day, Michael and Sophia found themselves sitting by the pool, watching the sun set over the ocean. It had become a ritual for them, a way to decompress after the intensity of the day. The sky was painted in shades of pink and orange, and the cool breeze off the water was refreshing. "It's beautiful here," Sophia said, her voice soft. Michael nodded, glancing at her. "Yeah, it is." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, enjoying the peace that had been so elusive in recent weeks. Finally, Sophia turned to him, her expression thoughtful. "You're doing a great job, Michael. I hope you know that." Michael smiled, his heart swelling with gratitude. "Thanks. I couldn't have done it without you." Sophia leaned her head on his shoulder, and they sat together as the sun dipped below the horizon, leaving the sky bathed in twilight. The next few months were a whirlwind of work for Michael. The resort was finally on a path towards stability, but every day presented a new challenge. Whether it was repairing the resort's damaged reputation or managing the lingering distrust among the staff, Michael knew there was still a long way to go. Sophia had become his closest confidant, and their relationship had grown stronger, both professionally and personally. They had agreed to take things slow, but there was no denying the connection between them. It was something Michael cherished, even though the weight of his responsibilities often kept him from fully exploring where that relationship could go. For now, they focused on their shared mission, restoring the resort to its former glory. One morning, as Michael was reviewing a report in his office, Linda walked in, her expression thoughtful. "You've been doing an incredible job," she said, sitting down across from him. But there's still a lot of unease among the staff. They've been through so much, and some of them are still wary about what's next." Michael looked up from the report, his brow furrowed. "I've noticed that too. I've been trying to address their concerns, but there's only so much I can do from here." Linda nodded. "That's why I think it's time for you to meet with the staff directly. Not just the department heads, the entire team. They need to hear from you, Michael. They need to know they can trust you." Michael exhaled slowly, thinking it over. His undercover time as Mike the janitor had given him insight into how the staff worked and what their concerns were. But ever since his true identity had been revealed, things had been different. Some staff members still saw him as an outsider who had been privileged his entire life, while others viewed him with suspicion, wondering if he would be just another version of James. "Okay," Michael said finally. "I'll hold a town hall meeting with the entire staff. I'll be transparent with them, answer their questions, and make sure they know I'm here for the long haul." Linda smiled, her eyes filled with pride. "Good. They need to see the real you, the one who's worked hard to save this place. It'll go a long way toward earning their trust." A few days later, the staff gathered in the resort's main conference room for the town hall meeting. There was an air of tension, As employees filed in, many of them whispering to each other as they took their seats, Michael stood at the front of the room, feeling the weight of their expectations pressing down on him. This was his chance to connect with them, to show them that he wasn't just the heir to the Wilson Beach Resort. He was someone who understood their struggles and was committed to making things right. As the last few employees settled into their seats, Michael stepped forward and began to speak. "Thank you all for being here today," he began, his voice steady. "I know the past few months have been difficult for everyone, and I want to acknowledge the hard work you've all done to keep this resort running despite everything that's happened." There were a few nods from the crowd, but most of the staff remained quiet, waiting to hear what he would say next. "I know that some of you are still unsure about the future. I know that trust was broken during James's time here, and that many of you were affected by his actions. I can't change what happened, but I can promise you this. Things are going to be different from now on." Michael paused, letting his words sink in. "I started here as a janitor, working alongside many of you without revealing who I really was. It wasn't easy, but it gave me a new perspective, one that I never would have had if I had simply taken over the resort without understanding how it all works from the ground up. I saw firsthand how much this place means to all of you, and I realized that the heart of this resort isn't just the guests or the luxury amenities, it's the people who work here. You are what makes this place special." There was a murmur of agreement from some of the staff, and Michael felt a spark of hope. He could sense that he was beginning to break through their skepticism. "I'm committed to rebuilding this resort, but I can't do it alone," Michael continued. "I need all of you to help me. Together, we can make this place stronger than ever before. But I want to hear from you too. I know you have questions, concerns, and ideas, and I'm here to listen." For the next hour, Michael fielded questions from the staff. Some were practical, asking about changes in management and future job security. Others were more emotional, expressing frustration and uncertainty about the changes that had already taken place. Michael answered each question honestly, admitting when he didn't have all the answers but promising to follow through. By the end of the meeting, the atmosphere in the room had shifted. There was still a long way to go, but Michael could see that many of the staff were beginning to trust him. He had taken the first step in bridging the gap between management and the employees, and that was a victory in itself. After the meeting, Michael stepped outside to get some fresh air. The sun was shining, and the warm breeze off the ocean felt like a small moment of relief after the intensity of the town hall. As he stood by the edge of the pool, watching the waves roll in, Sophia approached him. "That went well," she said, her tone light but with a hint of admiration. "I think you got through to them." Michael smiled, grateful for her support. "I hope so. It's going to take time, but I think we're on the right track." Sophia nodded, standing beside him and gazing out at the horizon. "You've done more than just get through to them, Michael. You've shown them that you care. That's something they haven't felt in a long time." Michael turned to look at her, appreciating the sincerity in her words. "I couldn't have done any of this without you, you know. You've been there every step of the way." Sophia smiled, her eyes meeting his. "We make a pretty good team, don't we?" Michael felt his heart swell. She was right. They had become more than just colleagues. They were partners, both in rebuilding the resort and in the connection they had forged. "I think we do," Michael said softly, his gaze lingering on hers. For a moment, the world around them seemed to fade away, and all that mattered was the quiet understanding between them. There was still so much work to be done, but for now, they had this moment, a brief reprieve in the middle of the storm. Over the next few weeks, Michael threw himself into the work of rebuilding the resort's reputation. He met with local business leaders, hosted events to attract new guests, and focused on strengthening the relationships with the resort's long-standing clientele. Slowly, the resort's image began to recover, and bookings started to increase. One evening, Michael and Sophia sat in his office, going over the latest numbers. The financial situation was still tight, but they were finally seeing signs of improvement. "We're starting to turn a corner," Sophia said, tapping the numbers on the spreadsheet. "If we keep this up, we'll be back in the black by the end of the year." Michael smiled, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. "That's the best news I've heard in a long time." Sophia grinned, leaning back in her chair. "I told you we'd get there." As they worked late into the night, the atmosphere between them shifted. The unspoken tension that had been building over the past few weeks was palpable, and Michael could no longer ignore the feelings that had grown between them. Finally, as they finished their work, Michael set down his pen and looked at Sophia. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice low. "About us." Sophia glanced up, her expression softening. "So have I." Michael hesitated for a moment, then continued. "I don't want to keep pretending that there's nothing between us. I know things are complicated, but I want to see where this goes." Sophia smiled, a hint of vulnerability in her eyes. "I do too, but we have to be careful. The last thing I want is for this to affect the work we're doing here." "I know," Michael said gently, "but I think we can handle it. We've handled everything else so far, haven't we?" Sophia laughed softly, her eyes shining. "Oh, I guess we have." Michael reached across the desk, taking her hand in his. "Then let's take it one step at a time. We'll figure it out." Sophia nodded, her smile widening. One step at a time. As they sat there, hands intertwined, Michael felt a sense of peace he hadn't felt in months. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like everything was going to be okay. The Wilson Beach Resort was finally starting to stabilize, but Michael knew they weren't out of the woods yet. With the staff more confident in his leadership and guest bookings on the rise, the resort was moving toward financial recovery. However, a sense of unease still lingered in the back of Michael's mind. James's departure had left a void in the resort's upper management, and while his corruption had been exposed, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that there were more secrets lurking beneath the surface. As much as Michael wanted to focus solely on rebuilding the resort, he couldn't ignore the strange discrepancies that continued to appear in the financial records. Despite Sophia's meticulous work in cleaning up the resort's books, there were still odd transactions popping up, small, seemingly insignificant amounts that didn't make sense. One afternoon, as Michael and Sophia reviewed the latest financial report in his office, Sophia furrowed her brow and pointed to a line on the spreadsheet. "Look at this," she said, her voice laced with concern. "These charges don't match up with any of our legitimate expenses. They're small, just a few $100s here and there, but they've been recurring for the past few months." Michael leaned over to examine the screen. The charges were all tied to a vendor they hadn't worked with in years, but the payments were still being made regularly. It was another red flag, one that hinted at the possibility that James wasn't the only one involved in shady dealings. Do you think this could be related to what James was doing?" Michael asked, his voice tense. Sophia shook her head, clearly deep in thought. "I'm not sure, but I think it's worth looking into. It could be nothing, but we've learned that it's better not to ignore things like this." Michael agreed. They couldn't afford to overlook anything, especially now that they were starting to recover. If there was another layer of corruption within the resort's operations, they needed to root it out before it could derail everything they had worked so hard to rebuild. "I'll dig deeper into the vendor records and see if I can trace where these payments are going," Sophia said. "But we'll need to be careful. If someone else is involved, they could be covering their tracks just like James did." Michael nodded, feeling the familiar tension return. They had been through so much already, but it seemed that the resort's troubles were far from over. The next day, Michael found himself standing in the staff lounge, watching as employees passed by on their lunch breaks. He had become more comfortable interacting with the staff since his town hall meeting, but he knew that some of them still had lingering doubts about his leadership. It was understandable they had been burned before, and trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt overnight. As Michael was about to leave the lounge, he spotted Mark, the head of maintenance, sitting at a table, staring at his phone with a frown on his face. Mark had been with the resort for years, and Michael had always respected his work ethic and dedication. But recently, Mark had seemed distant, almost distracted. "Hey, Mark," Michael said as he approached the table. "Mind if I join you?" Mark looked up, surprised by the interruption, but nodded. "Sure. Have a seat." Michael sat down, sensing that something was bothering him. "Everything okay? You've seemed a little off lately." Mark hesitated for a moment, then sighed. "It's nothing, really. Just some personal stuff." Michael leaned forward, trying to gauge whether there was more to the story. "Abid, if there's anything I can do to help, let me know. You've been a big part of this place for a long time, and I want to make sure you're doing all right." Mark offered a small smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I appreciate that, Michael. It's just, a lot's been going on, you know. James leaving, the changes around here. It's been hard to keep up." Michael nodded, understanding the weight of what Mark was feeling. The upheaval caused by James's actions had affected everyone, and the uncertainty of the future weighed heavily on the staff. "I get it," Michael said quietly. "It hasn't been easy for any of us, but if there's anything specific going on, I want to know. We're trying to turn things around, and we can't do that if people are keeping things bottled up." For a moment, it looked like Mark might say more, but he quickly shook his head. "Nah, it's nothing serious. Just some old habits from James's time that I'm trying to break. I'll figure it out." Michael didn't push further, but as he left the lounge, his mind raced. Mark's hesitation felt off, and Michael couldn't help but wonder if there was more to his story. Could Mark have been involved in James's schemes, or was he simply trying to cope with the fallout? Whatever the case, Michael knew he couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something was still wrong. That evening, after finishing his shift, Michael met with Sophia again to go over what she had found in the financial records. They sat in Michael's office, the soft glow of the desk lamp casting long shadows across the room as Sophia pulled up the latest data on her laptop. "I've traced the payments to a company called Blue Coast Services," Sophia explained, her voice steady. "It's a shell company. There's no real business behind it. And guess who's listed as the owner?" Michael's stomach dropped. "Let me guess, James." Sophia shook her head. "No, it's Mark." Michael stared at her, disbelief flooding through him. "Mark? That doesn't make sense. He's been here for years. He's always been loyal." "I know," Sophia said, her expression serious. "But the records don't lie. These payments have been going to an account linked to Mark, and they started around the same time James's schemes ramped up." Michael leaned back in his chair, trying to process the revelation. Mark had always been someone he trusted, someone who had worked at the resort long before Michael ever considered stepping into a leadership role. The idea that he could be involved in something shady was hard to accept. "Now, do you think Mark was working with James?" Michael asked, his voice low. "It's possible," Sophia said. "Or he could have been running his own scheme on the side. Either way, he's been siphoning money from the resort for months." Michael rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of the situation settle over him. They had been so focused on James that they hadn't considered the possibility of others being involved. And now, the truth was staring them in the face. Mark, someone they had trusted, had been part of the problem all along. "What do we do?" Michael asked, his voice strained. "We need more evidence," Sophia replied. "We can't confront him without concrete proof. If we go to the board with what we have now, it could blow up in our faces. We need to dig deeper." Michael nodded, knowing she was right. They had to be careful, just like with James. Any misstep could send everything crashing down. "We'll keep this between us for now," Michael said. "But we need to find out how deep this goes. If Mark was involved with James, there could be others." Sophia agreed, her expression grim. "I'll keep looking through the records. There's got to be a trail somewhere." The next few days were tense. Michael went about his duties as usual, but he couldn't shake the feeling that everyone around him was keeping secrets. Mark continued to act distant, and every time Michael saw him, the weight of what they had discovered hung heavily in the air. One afternoon, as Michael was walking through the maintenance wing, he overheard a hushed conversation coming from Mark's office. He paused, his heart racing, and listened carefully. "Just keep it quiet for now," Mark's voice said, tense and low. "I'll handle it." Michael's blood ran cold. He couldn't hear who Mark was talking to, but the tone of the conversation confirmed his worst suspicions. Mark was hiding something, and whatever it was serious. Michael stepped back, careful not to make any noise, and quickly made his way back to his office. He needed to talk to Sophia. This was getting more complicated by the minute, and they couldn't afford to make a wrong move. That evening, Michael and Sophia met in the same small office where they had uncovered so much about James's schemes. This time, the stakes felt even higher. "I overheard Mark talking to someone today," Michael said, his voice tight. "He was trying to cover something up. I don't know who he was talking to, but it sounded serious." Sophia's expression darkened. "We need to move fast. If Mark is still involved in something, we have to stop him before he can do any more damage." Michael nodded, his jaw set with determination. "We'll keep digging, and when we have enough, we'll bring it to the board. But we can't let him know we're onto him." As they sat together, strategizing their next move, Michael couldn't help but feel the weight of the secrets surrounding the resort. It seemed like every time they uncovered one truth, another layer of deception revealed itself. But Michael was determined to see this through, no matter what it took. As the days passed, Michael's anxiety grew. The discovery of Mark's involvement in the mysterious payments weighed heavily on him. It felt like a betrayal, one that mirrored the same disillusionment he had felt when James's corruption came to light. Now, Michael found himself in the uncomfortable position of having to question yet another trusted member of the resort's long-standing staff. The resort had started to recover financially, but these internal issues threatened to pull them back into the same chaos they had just escaped. Michael knew he needed more evidence before taking any action, but the idea that Mark, someone he had once considered loyal, could be involved in something this underhanded ate away at him. Sophia, too, was feeling the pressure. She had worked tirelessly to clean up the resort's financial mess, but now it seemed that the problems ran deeper than they initially thought. Together, they continued to investigate quietly, their partnership strengthening in the face of adversity. One evening, after another long day of meetings and paperwork, Michael sat in his office, reviewing the latest financial records Sophia had uncovered. His phone buzzed on the desk, pulling him from his thoughts. It was a message from Sophia. "Sophia, I've found something. Meet me in the back office when you can." Michael's pulse quickened as he grabbed his jacket and headed toward the small office they had used as their investigation headquarters. The hallway was quiet, the sounds of the bustling resort fading into the background as he made his way through the administrative wing. When he arrived, Sophia was already there, her laptop open in front of her, the screen displaying a series of financial records. Sophia didn't waste any time. "I found another set of payments, similar to the ones we traced to Mark's shell company. They're smaller, but they're consistent, spread out over several months, and they're going to someone else." Michael's heart sank. "Who?" Sophia hesitated before responding. "It's not someone from the resort. The payments are being routed to an outside contractor, someone who's been working on maintenance projects for us for years." Michael's mind raced. "So, Mark's been funneling money to an outside contractor. For what?" Sophia frowned, her fingers tapping the keyboard as she scrolled through the records. "Lenny, that's the thing. There's no record of any actual work being done. The payments are marked as expenses for routine maintenance. But when I cross-reference them with the maintenance logs, there's no corresponding work. It's a complete fabrication." Michael sat down heavily, the weight of this new revelation settling over him. It wasn't just Mark. They were dealing with a much bigger scheme. If Mark had been making fraudulent payments to an outside contractor, it meant he wasn't acting alone. Someone else was benefiting from this, and they were using the resort's resources to do it. "We need to figure out who's behind this," Michael said, his voice low. "If Mark's involved, there's no telling how many others are in on it." Sophia nodded. "I'll keep digging, but we're running out of time. If we don't act soon, they could cover their tracks. Michael agreed. They had to be careful, but they couldn't afford to wait much longer. The more they uncovered, the more dangerous the situation became. If they weren't careful, the entire scheme could blow up in their faces, taking the resort down with it. The next morning, Michael decided to confront Mark. He couldn't sit idly by while this corruption festered. He needed to know if Mark was involved in the fraud willingly or if there was something deeper going on. As he walked through the maintenance wing, his thoughts churned. Mark had always been one of the most dependable employees, someone Michael's father had trusted implicitly. But now, that trust was in question. Michael found Mark in the maintenance office, going over paperwork. The sight of him, sitting there as if nothing had changed, made Michael's stomach turn. "Mark," Michael said, stepping into the room. Mark looked up, surprised by Michael's sudden appearance. "Michael, what can I do for you?" Michael shut the door behind him, his expression serious. "We need to talk." Mark's brow furrowed, and he set down the papers in his hand. "About what?" Michael didn't waste time. "I know about the payments, Mark. The ones you've been funneling to Blue Coast Services." Mark's face paled, and for a moment Michael saw a flicker of panic in his eyes, but he quickly masked it, leaning back in his chair with a forced calm. "I don't know what you're talking about," Mark said, his voice tight. "Don't lie to me," Michael said, his voice firm but controlled. "We've been going through the financial records, and it's all there. You've been making fraudulent payments to a shell company. I want to know why." Mark stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. "I don't have to explain anything to you. I've been working here for years, longer than you've even been involved with this place. You don't know what it takes to run this resort." Michael stepped closer, refusing to back down. "I'm not asking you to explain. I'm telling you that this stops now. If you come clean, we can figure out a way to deal with this. But if you keep lying, it's only going to get worse." For a moment, Mark looked like he might break. His face was flushed, his hands trembling slightly as he clenched his fists. But instead of confessing, he sneered. "You think you're in charge now, don't you?" Mark said, his voice dripping with contempt. "You've always had everything handed to you, money, power, this resort. You don't understand what it's like to actually work for something." Michael's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice steady. "I understand more than you think, and I understand that what you're doing is going to destroy this place if you don't stop." Mark shook his head, his eyes hardening. "You don't know what you're talking about. I've done more for this resort than you ever will. And if you think you can take me down, you're dead wrong." With that, Mark shoved past Michael and stormed out of the office, leaving Michael standing there, the weight of the confrontation settling over him. Michael returned to his office, his mind racing. Mark's reaction had only confirmed his suspicions. He was guilty, but there was more to the story. Someone else was involved, and Mark was protecting them. But who? Sophia was already there, waiting for him with more information. "I found something," she said as soon as Michael walked in. "The contractor Mark's been sending money to. It's not just a random company. I traced the owner back to a man named Tony Ortega. He's been listed as a contractor for several properties, but here's the thing, he's never actually done any work. It's all a front." Michael frowned. "Do we know who Ortega is?" Sophia nodded, her expression grim. He's got ties to organized crime. He's been using fake contracts to launder money for years, and somehow he's gotten involved with Mark and the resort." Michael felt a chill run down his spine. This was bigger than he had anticipated. Mark wasn't just siphoning money from the resort. He was involved in something far more dangerous. If Tony Ortega was part of this, it meant they were dealing with criminals who wouldn't hesitate to protect their interests. "Do we have to stop this?" Michael said, his voice filled with urgency. "We need to gather everything we have and go to the authorities." Sophia agreed, but her expression remained tense. "We'll need to be careful. If Ortega gets wind that we're onto him, he could retaliate, and we don't know how deep this goes." Michael nodded, his mind already racing with possibilities. They had to act quickly, but they couldn't afford to make any mistakes. The stakes were higher than ever, and one wrong move could put them all in danger. That night, As Michael sat in his office, staring out at the moonlit ocean, the gravity of the situation settled over him. His father had built this resort as a place of peace, a paradise where guests could escape the world's problems. But now it had become a battleground, and Michael found himself at the center of a fight he hadn't seen coming. But he couldn't back down. He'd already lost too much: his father, his sense of security, and the trust of people he thought were loyal. He wasn't going to lose the resort too. Sophia had been right all along. They were in this together, and as long as they kept digging, they would find a way to expose the corruption and save the resort from the forces trying to tear it apart. But as the night grew darker, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. Michael sat in his office, staring at the documents spread across his desk. The weight of everything he had uncovered was almost suffocating. Mark's involvement in the fraudulent payments and his connection to Tony Ortega had thrown Michael into a dangerous game he hadn't expected to be part of. The resort was no longer just a business to manage. It had become a battleground where he was fighting not only for the legacy his father left behind, but also for the safety of everyone involved. Sophia sat across from him, her face a mixture of determination and concern. "We're running out of time, Michael. We need to act before this gets out of control. If Ortega realizes we're onto him, he'll go into hiding, and we'll lose any chance of stopping him." Michael nodded, his mind racing. They had gathered enough evidence to go to the authorities, but something still felt off. There was more to the story, and Michael couldn't shake the feeling that Mark was hiding something bigger than just the money laundering scheme they had uncovered. "We need more information," Michael said, leaning back in his chair. "Mark's protecting someone, and I need to know who. If Ortega's involved, then this could be a lot more dangerous than we thought." Sophia's eyes narrowed as she considered his words. "You're right, but how do we get more information? Mark won't talk, and we can't exactly confront Ortega without risking everything." Michael exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. "We need to confront Mark again. This time, we push harder. He knows more than he's letting on, and if we don't get to the bottom of this soon, it could destroy the resort." Sophia nodded in agreement, but her eyes remained filled with worry. "Just be careful, Michael. Mark's already feeling cornered, and if we push him too far—" "I know," Michael said quietly, "but we don't have a choice." Later that evening, Michael found Mark working late in the maintenance wing. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glow on the empty hallway as Michael approached the office. Mark was alone, hunched over a desk filled with maintenance logs, but Michael could see the tension in his posture. He knew something was coming. "Mark," Michael said as he entered the office, his voice calm but firm. Mark glanced up, his face immediately hardening when he saw Michael. "What do you want now?" Michael didn't bother with pleasantries. "We need to talk about Ortega, about the money, about everything you've been hiding." Mark stood up from his desk, his expression shifting from anger to something darker. "Fear. I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me," Michael said, stepping closer. "We've traced the payments, Mark. We know about Ortega. We know about the fake contracts. The only thing I don't understand is why you're involved." Mark's jaw tightened, and for a moment he looked like he might fight back. But then his shoulders slumped, and the anger drained from his face, replaced by something Michael hadn't expected: resignation. "You don't understand," Mark said quietly, sitting back down. "It's not what you think." "Then tell me," Michael demanded. "Tell me why you've been siphoning money from the resort. Tell me why you're working with Ortega." Mark looked up at Michael, his eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and desperation. "I didn't have a choice." Michael frowned, his suspicion growing. "What do you mean?" Mark sighed heavily, leaning forward on his desk as if the weight of the world had settled on his shoulders. "It started a few years ago. I got into some trouble, bad financial decisions. I was in over my head. And Ortega, he offered me a way out. He promised to fix everything, to make my debts disappear. All I had to do was help him move some money through the resort's accounts. At first, It was small amounts, nothing that would raise any red flags, but then it got bigger, and by the time I realized what I'd gotten myself into, it was too late. Michael stared at Mark, his mind reeling from the confession. You let Ortega use the resort to launder money? Mark nodded, his face pale. I didn't see any other way out. If I'd refused, Ortega would have come after me, and my family. I didn't want to do it, Michael, but I didn't have a choice. Michael took a deep breath, trying to process everything. He had always known there was more to Mark's involvement, but it was worse than he had imagined. Why didn't you come to me? Michael asked, his voice filled with frustration. Why didn't you tell me what was going on? Mark shook his head, his eyes filled with regret. I couldn't. Ortega has people everywhere. If I'd said anything, it would have been the end for me, and for anyone who knew about it. Michael clenched his fists, feeling a surge of anger. Ortega had used Mark, just like he had used the resort, and now they were all caught in his web of corruption. And Mark, you need to help us stop this, Michael said, his voice firm but pleading. If we go to the authorities with what we have, we can take Ortega down, but we need your cooperation. Mark hesitated, fear flickering in his eyes. You don't understand what you're asking. If Ortega finds out I've turned on him, he won't, Michael interrupted. We'll protect you, but we can't let this continue. The resort, my father's legacy, can't survive this if we don't act now. For a long moment, Mark didn't respond. He sat there, staring at the floor, the weight of his decision pressing down on him. Then, slowly, he nodded. All right, Mark said quietly. I'll help you, but we have to be careful. Ortega is dangerous, and if he even suspects we're onto him, we'll handle it, Michael assured him, feeling a glimmer of hope. Are you doing the right thing? The next morning, Michael met with Sophia to go over the details of their plan. Mark had agreed to gather more information about Ortega's operations, but they had to act quickly. Ortega was powerful, and the longer they waited, the more dangerous the situation became. Sophia looked over the latest financial records with a grim expression. We have enough to go to the authorities now, but we need to make sure we're protected. Ortega's not just some small-time criminal. If we make a move without the proper precautions, it could backfire. Michael nodded, his mind racing. We'll need to contact the police discreetly, and we'll have to do it soon. Mark's given us enough to tie Ortega to the resort, but we need to make sure we have everything in place before we confront him. Sophia's eyes met Michael's, a flicker of worry in her gaze. You're putting a lot on the line here, Michael. If this goes wrong, I know, Michael said quietly, but we don't have a choice. They had come too far to back down now. Michael had spent months fighting to save the resort, and he wasn't about to let Ortega or anyone else tear it down. But the stakes were higher than ever, and one wrong move could bring everything crashing down. That night, as Michael lay in bed, his thoughts wouldn't stop racing. The plan was in motion, but the fear of what could go wrong lingered in his mind. He thought about his father, about everything he had built, and how close they were to losing it all. But more than anything, he thought about the people who depended on the resort. The staff, the guests, and even Mark. This fight wasn't just about saving a business, it was about saving lives. As sleep finally claimed him, Michael knew one thing for sure. The next few days would determine everything. They had to stop Ortega, and they had to do it before he realized what was happening. The following day, Michael met with Mark in secret. They went over the final details of their plan, and Michael could see the fear etched on Mark's face. But there was also a sense of resolve. Mark had made his decision, and now there was no turning back. Are you sure you're ready for this? Michael asked, his voice low. Mark nodded, though his hands were trembling slightly. I don't have a choice. We have to end this. Michael clapped him on the shoulder, offering a small smile. We will, together. As Mark left, Michael stood in the quiet office, his heart pounding. This was it. Everything was riding on the next few days, and Michael could only hope that they had done enough to bring Ortega down. The following morning, the resort hummed with its usual activity, but for Michael the air felt heavier, thick with the weight of what was about to unfold. He had spent the night preparing for the confrontation that would soon come, going over every possible scenario in his head. Today was the day they would set their plan in motion, the day they would take down Tony Ortega and expose the web of corruption that had infested his family's resort. Sophia had arranged a meeting with a trusted contact in the police department, someone who specialized in organized crime. They couldn't take any chances. Ortega was dangerous, and if they weren't careful, he could disappear before they had enough evidence to bring him down. Michael arrived at the back office, where Sophia was waiting for him. Her face was serious, her usual calm demeanor replaced with a sense of urgency. Everything's set," she said, looking up from her laptop. "I spoke with Detective Ramos this morning. He's ready to move forward, but he needs us to get Ortega on record. We need something concrete that ties him directly to the payments and the money laundering." Michael's heart raced. "So, we're going to have to get him to incriminate himself." Sophia nodded. "Mark's agreed to wear a wire. He'll meet with Ortega and get him to admit everything. Once we have that, Ramos will move in and make the arrest." Michael felt a surge of anxiety at the thought of putting Mark in that position. He knew how dangerous Ortega was, and the idea of Mark confronting him made Michael uneasy. But there was no other option. If they didn't act now, Ortega would slip away, and the resort would be left to crumble under the weight of its past mistakes. "Mark's ready for this?" Michael asked, his voice low. Sophia hesitated, then nodded. "As ready as he can be. He knows what's at stake." Michael sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "All right, let's do this." Later that day, Mark sat nervously in the maintenance office, waiting for Ortega to arrive. He was wearing a hidden microphone, the small device discreetly attached to the inside of his shirt. His hands trembled slightly as he stared at the door, knowing that what he was about to do could either save him or destroy him. Michael and Sophia watched the live feed from a remote location, their hearts pounding as they listened to the tension in Mark's voice. Detective Ramos and his team were stationed nearby, ready to move in the moment Ortega incriminated himself. As the minutes ticked by, the room seemed to grow colder, the weight of the operation pressing down on everyone involved. Michael couldn't shake the sense of dread that something would go wrong, that Ortega would sense the trap and escape before they could act. Finally, the door to the maintenance office creaked open, and Ortega stepped inside. He was tall and imposing, his presence commanding the room. He glanced around, his sharp eyes scanning the space before his gaze settled on Mark. "You called for me?" Ortega said, his voice smooth but laced with menace. Mark swallowed hard, trying to steady his breathing. "Yeah, we need to talk. There's a problem with the payments." Ortega raised an eyebrow, stepping closer to Mark. "A problem?" Mark nodded, his hands shaking slightly as he forced himself to stay calm. "People are asking questions. Michael's been looking into the finances, and he's starting to connect the dots. If we don't do something soon, he's going to figure it all out." Ortega's eyes darkened, and he leaned in closer, his voice low and threatening. "I told you to keep things under control, Mark. If he finds out about the money, you're the one who's going to pay for it." Michael listened intently from the remote feed, his fists clenched as he watched the scene unfold. He could hear the fear in Mark's voice, and it made his stomach churn. "I've done everything I can," Mark said, his voice trembling. "But Michael's not backing down. He's too close. We need to shut this down, or it's all going to blow up in our faces." Ortega's lips curled into a sneer, and he crossed his arms over his chest. "You think I'm just going to walk away because some spoiled rich kid is asking questions? You're in this, Mark. You made your choices. Now you deal with the consequences." Mark's breathing quickened, and he stammered, I didn't sign up for this. You promised me you'd keep me out of it, but now Michael's onto us, and if he takes this to the authorities, we're all screwed." Ortega's expression shifted, a cold smile spreading across his face. "You think Michael's the problem. You're the one who's weak, Mark. You couldn't handle the pressure, and now you're panicking. If you want to keep your head, you'd better get control of the situation. Otherwise—" Ortega didn't finish the sentence, but the threat hung in the air like a dark cloud. Mark looked down, his hands trembling as he realized how deep he was in. Michael's heart pounded as he listened to the conversation. They were so close to getting Ortega to incriminate himself, but it felt like a razor's edge. One wrong word, and everything could fall apart. Mark swallowed hard and spoke again, his voice shaky but determined. "I need to know what the next step is. If we're going to keep this quiet, I need your assurance that I'm protected. I won't go down alone." Ortega chuckled darkly, stepping even closer to Mark. "You're already in too deep. You think there's a way out of this. You're part of the operation now. You're part of the money laundering, part of the whole damn thing. If you want to stay out of prison, you do exactly what I tell you." There it was, the confession they needed. Ortega had finally admitted to the scheme, and Michael could feel the tension in the room shift as Detective Ramos and his team prepared to move in. Mark took a deep breath, knowing the end was near. "So, you admit it. You've been using the resort to launder money?" Ortega sneered. "Of course I have. And you've been helping me every step of the way." Suddenly, the door to the maintenance office burst open, and a team of officers flooded the room, guns drawn. Ortega's face twisted in shock as he realized what was happening. "Hands in the air! Ortega!" Detective Ramos barked, his voice commanding. Ortega hesitated for a moment, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for a way out. But there was no escape. The officers quickly surrounded him, and with no other option, Ortega raised his hands, a snarl on his face. "You think you can stop me?" Ortega spat, glaring at Mark. "This isn't over." Mark remained silent, his face pale as the officers moved in to handcuff Ortega. Michael and Sophia watched from the remote feed, their hearts pounding with both relief and exhaustion. They had done it. Ortega was in custody, and the nightmare that had threatened to destroy the resort was finally coming to an end. Later that evening, Michael stood on the balcony of the resort, staring out at the ocean as the waves crashed against the shore. The weight of the day's events hung heavily on him, but for the first time in months, he felt a sense of peace. They had taken down Ortega, and with him, the corruption that had nearly torn the resort apart. Sophia joined him on the balcony, standing quietly beside him as they both took in the view. The tension between them had eased now that the immediate danger had passed. But Michael knew they still had a long road ahead. "How are you feeling?" Sophia asked softly, her eyes reflecting the fading light of the sunset. Michael smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. Relieved, but also tired. "There's still so much to fix, and I don't know if we'll ever fully recover from all of this." Sophia nodded, her hand gently brushing against his arm. "We'll get there. You've already done more than anyone else could have. Your father would be proud of you." Michael's heart tightened at her words. He thought about his father every day, wondering if he was living up to the legacy that had been left for him. But as he stood there with Sophia by his side, he realized that maybe, just maybe, he was finally on the right path. "Thanks," he said quietly, turning to look at her. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." Sophia smiled, her eyes soft and warm. "We're a team, Michael. Always have been." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, the sound of the ocean lulling them into a moment of peace. For now, the storm had passed, but Michael knew that the challenges weren't over yet. They still had to rebuild the resort's reputation, repair the damage done by James and Ortega, and restore the trust of the staff and the guests. But as long as they faced it together, Michael was confident that they could overcome whatever came next. With Tony Ortega behind bars and the immediate threat to the resort neutralized, Michael felt the first true sense of relief in what seemed like months. The sting operation had gone off without a hitch, and Ortega's arrest was the final piece needed to start rebuilding not only the resort's integrity, but also the trust of the staff and guests. However, the work was far from over. As Michael walked through the resort grounds the next morning, everything seemed a little different. The sun shone a little brighter, the ocean breeze felt a little lighter, and for the first time in a long while, he wasn't looking over his shoulder. The storm had passed, but now came the long, slow task of repairing the damage it had left behind. He met with Sophia later that morning in the lobby. Her expression was one of cautious optimism. Although the worst of their problems seemed to be over, there were still financials to fix, reputations to rebuild, and a resort to manage. "We did it," Michael said with a soft smile, running a hand through his hair as they stood by the large windows overlooking the pool. "I mean, we actually pulled it off." Sophia grinned back at him, though the weariness of the past few weeks still clung to her features. "I knew we would. I just didn't think it would take so much out of us." Michael chuckled. "I don't think I've had a good night's sleep in months." Sophia's smile faded slightly as she leaned closer, her voice lowering. "But we can't relax too much. The resort's reputation took a serious hit. Word's already gotten out about Ortega and James. Some of the long-time guests are worried, and there are still financial issues we haven't fully addressed." Michael nodded, sobering at her words. "You're right. The fallout from all of this could still hurt us if we don't handle it carefully. We need to get ahead of it." They had managed to keep the worst of the resort's problems under wraps, but rumors spread quickly, and Michael knew that if they didn't control the narrative, the situation could spiral out of their control. The media had already started sniffing around, and though the police had kept the details of Ortega's arrest confidential, it wouldn't be long before people started asking questions. "We need to make a public statement," Michael said, his tone decisive. "We'll address the guests directly, reassure them that the resort is still the paradise it's always been, and let them know that we're taking steps to ensure nothing like this ever happens again." Sophia agreed. "That's a good start. But we also need to rebuild internally. The staff has been through a lot. They've lost trust in management, and some of them are still worried about their jobs." Michael sighed. He knew she was right. "We'll hold another staff meeting. This time, I'll be even more transparent about what happened and what our plan is moving forward." Sophia smiled, her eyes softening. "You're doing the right thing, Michael. It's not going to be easy, but you've shown everyone here that you're in it for the long haul." That afternoon, Michael stood in front of the staff once again, this time with a clearer sense of purpose. The employees gathered in the conference room, their expressions a mixture of curiosity, relief, and concern. They had been through so much over the past few months. Many of them had faced uncertainty about their jobs, the future of the resort, and whether or not they could trust the leadership. Michael took a deep breath and began to speak. "I know the last few months have been hard for all of us," he said, his voice steady but filled with sincerity. "There have been moments when it felt like everything was falling apart, and I know many of you have wondered what's going to happen next." There were murmurs of agreement from the staff, and Michael could feel their eyes on him, waiting for him to deliver something they could hold on to. "But I want you to know that we're not going anywhere," Michael continued, his voice growing stronger. "This resort has been through a lot, but it's still standing, and that's because of all of you. You are the heart of this place, and without your dedication and hard work, we wouldn't have made it through this storm." He paused, letting his words sink in. The room was silent, but Michael could feel the tension slowly easing. "I know there's still uncertainty," he said, his tone softening, "but I want to be as transparent as possible with all of you. The issues with James and Ortega are being dealt with, and we've taken steps to make sure nothing like this ever happens again. But it's going to take time to rebuild. There are going to be challenges, and I can't promise that it will be easy. But I can promise you this. I'm committed to making this place better than it's ever been, and I'm committed to all of you." There was a ripple of quiet murmurs, and for the first time, Michael saw something he hadn't seen in a long time: hope. After the meeting, several employees came up to him, thanking him for his honesty and expressing their support. The staff was beginning to trust him again, and that was the first step toward healing. In the days that followed, Michael worked tirelessly to address the concerns of both the staff and the guests. He held meetings with the resort's department heads, reorganizing the leadership structure to ensure transparency and accountability. He worked closely with Linda, his mother, to rebuild the resort's reputation among its loyal clientele, and he consulted with public relations experts to handle the inevitable media attention that would come once the full story of Ortega's arrest was revealed. One evening, after a particularly long day, Michael sat in his office, reviewing the resort's latest financials. The numbers were slowly improving, but there was still a lot of work to be done. As he stared at the spreadsheets, his phone buzzed with a message. It was from Sophia. "Sophia, meet me by the pool. I think we both need a break." Michael smiled, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. He needed that break more than he realized. When Michael arrived at the pool, the sun was beginning to set, casting a warm golden glow over the water. Sophia was sitting on one of the lounge chairs, her shoes off and her feet dangling in the pool. She smiled when she saw him approach. "Hey," she said, her voice soft and warm. "I figured we deserved at least a few minutes of peace." Michael chuckled, sitting down beside her. "I think you're right." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the sounds of the resort fading into the background as they watched the sun dip below the horizon. For the first time in weeks, Michael felt a sense of calm wash over him. "You've done an amazing job, you know," Sophia said after a few moments, her voice filled with admiration. "You've turned this place around. Your father would be proud." Michael's heart tightened at her words. He had thought about his father every day since the beginning of this ordeal, wondering if he was making the right decisions, if he was living up to the legacy his father had left behind. But now, sitting here with Sophia, he realized that he had done more than just preserve his father's legacy. He had made it his own. "Thank you," Michael said quietly, his eyes meeting hers. "I couldn't have done any of this without you, Sophia. You've been my rock through all of this." Sophia smiled, her eyes softening. "We make a pretty good team." Michael looked at her for a long moment, the weight of everything they had been through settling between them. They had faced so much together: betrayal, corruption, danger, and through it all their bond had only grown stronger. Without thinking, Michael reached for her hand, his fingers gently brushing against hers. Sophia didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned in closer, her eyes filled with the same warmth and affection that Michael had felt for her all along. "One step at a time." "Right," Michael said softly, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Sophia grinned, her eyes twinkling with that familiar spark. "One step at a time." As they sat there, watching the sun disappear below the horizon, Michael felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The worst was behind them, and now, with Sophia by his side, he could finally look toward the future. The resort wasn't just a place of business anymore. It was home, and together they would rebuild it into something stronger, something better than it had ever been before. Michael stood on the balcony of the resort's main building, watching as the early morning sun bathed the landscape in warm light. The ocean stretched out before him, calm and peaceful, a stark contrast to the chaos that had nearly torn the resort apart in recent months. But now, there was a sense of renewal in the air. They had weathered the storm, and though the road ahead was still uncertain, Michael could feel that they were finally on solid ground. With Tony Ortega behind bars and the corruption exposed, Michael had been able to turn his full attention to the resort. The staff had rallied behind him, working together to rebuild the sense of trust and community that had been lost. The guests, once hesitant, were slowly returning, drawn by the promise of a fresh start and the assurance that the resort was back in capable hands. It wasn't just about fixing the financials or restoring the resort's reputation anymore. It was about something deeper, honoring his father's legacy while forging his own path. Michael had come to understand that he wasn't just running a business, he was leading a family. The people who worked at the resort, the guests who had come to know it as a second home, they were all part of something much bigger than profits and numbers on a spreadsheet. As he stood there, lost in thought, his phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a message from Sophia. "Sophia, are you ready for today? Big meeting coming up." Michael smiled to himself. Today was a critical day for the resort. He and Linda had arranged a meeting with several key investors, people who had supported the resort for years but had pulled back during the recent scandal. It was time to bring them back on board, to show them that the resort was stronger than ever, and that their trust in the Wilson family was not misplaced. Michael typed a quick response. "Michael, I'm ready. Thanks for always being in my corner." The meeting was set for mid-morning, and by the time Michael arrived at the conference room, Linda was already there, going over the final details. She looked as calm and composed as ever, but Michael could see the determination in her eyes. His mother had been through so much, losing her husband, dealing with the betrayal of James, and now helping Michael guide the resort through its darkest days. But through it all, she had remained a pillar of strength. "Are you ready for this?" Linda asked, looking up from her notes. Michael nodded, feeling more confident than he had in a long time. "We've got this." One by one, the investors arrived, taking their seats around the large table. Michael greeted each of them with a firm handshake and a warm smile, knowing that their support was crucial to the resort's continued recovery. As they settled in, Michael and Linda began their presentation, outlining the steps they had taken to stabilize the resort and the plans they had for the future. Sophia had helped prepare the financial reports, and as Michael went through the numbers, he could see the investors nodding in approval. They had cut costs without sacrificing quality, increased transparency in their operations, and implemented new systems to ensure that the mistakes of the past would never be repeated. But more than the numbers, it was Michael's passion for the resort that seemed to resonate with the investors. He spoke from the heart, sharing his vision for the future and his commitment to the people who made the resort what it was. "In this resort isn't just a business," Michael said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "It's a family. It's a place where people come to escape, to relax, and to create memories. My father built this resort on trust, and I intend to honor that legacy by making it even better than it was before, but I can't do it alone. I need your support. Together, we can take this resort to new heights." When Michael finished speaking, the room was quiet for a moment. Then one of the senior investors, Mr. Harrington, stood up, a thoughtful expression on his face. "You've done an impressive job, Michael," Harrington said, his voice carrying a weight of authority. "We were concerned about the direction the resort was heading, but it's clear that you've taken control of the situation. I believe in what you're doing here, and I think I speak for the rest of us when I say that we're willing to stand by you." There were murmurs of agreement from the other investors, and Michael felt a wave of relief wash over him. They had done it. The investors were back on board, and with their support, the resort's future was secure. After the meeting, Michael stepped outside to get some fresh air. The weight of the past few months felt lighter now, and for the first time in a long time, he could see a clear path forward. As he stood by the pool, watching the guests enjoy the warm afternoon sun, he felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Sophia. "You did it," she said, her voice soft but filled with pride. "They're back on board." Michael smiled, turning to face her. "We did it. I couldn't have done any of this without you." Sophia shrugged modestly. "I just crunched the numbers. You're the one who convinced them to stay." Michael shook his head. "It was more than that, Sophia. You've been with me every step of the way. You've believed in me when I didn't even believe in myself." There was a moment of quiet between them, and then Sophia smiled, her eyes shining. "I always believed in you, Michael. From the moment we started working together, I knew you were capable of great things." Michael's heart swelled with gratitude and something deeper, something that had been growing between them for a long time. He stepped closer, his hand gently brushing against hers. "Sophia," he began, his voice low, "I've been thinking a lot about everything we've been through together. I don't just want you by my side as my partner at the resort. I want you by my side, period." Sophia's eyes widened slightly, and for a moment she looked surprised, but then her expression softened, and she stepped closer to him, her hand sliding into his. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" she asked, a teasing smile playing on her lips. Michael chuckled, feeling his nerves melt away. Yeah, I think I am. Before he could say anything more, Sophia closed the distance between them, her lips meeting his in a soft, gentle kiss. It was a moment of pure connection, one that had been building for so long, and as they pulled apart, Michael could see the same feelings reflected in her eyes. "I've been waiting for you to say that," Sophia said with a grin. Michael laughed, feeling a lightness in his chest that he hadn't felt in months. "Well, I'm glad I finally got around to it." Over the next few weeks, the resort continued to thrive. The staff was more motivated than ever, the guests were returning in droves, and the investors were fully committed to supporting Michael's vision for the future. But it wasn't just the resort that had transformed. Michael had changed too. He had started this journey with doubts and fears, unsure if he was capable of living up to his father's legacy. But now he realized that he didn't need to live in his father's shadow. He had forged his own path, building something new while honoring what had come before. And with Sophia by his side, he knew that the future was bright. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the resort, Michael stood on the balcony of his office, watching the waves roll in. Sophia joined him, leaning against the railing as they took in the view together. "Did you ever think about what your dad would say if he could see you now?" Sophia asked quietly, her voice soft in the evening air. Michael smiled, his heart full. "Yeah, I think he'd be proud. But more than that, I think he'd be happy that we didn't give up." Sophia nodded, her hand slipping into his. "You've built something incredible here, Michael. And this is just the beginning." Michael looked out at the horizon, the endless possibilities stretching out before him. The resort was more than just a business. It was a legacy, a home, and a place of hope. And with everything they had been through, Michael knew one thing for sure. They were ready for whatever came next. The days leading up to the grand reopening of the Wilson Beach Resort had been a whirlwind of activity. Preparations were in full swing as the staff worked tirelessly to ensure everything was perfect for the event that would mark a new chapter for the resort. For Michael, it was more than just a reopening. It was the culmination of months of hard work, sacrifice, and determination to restore the legacy his father had built. The sun was setting on the day of the celebration, casting a warm orange glow over the resort's manicured gardens and pristine beach. The scene was nothing short of picturesque, and as Michael walked through the grounds, greeting guests and staff, he felt a deep sense of pride. This moment wasn't just about the business. It was about everyone who had come together to rebuild something stronger, more resilient than it had ever been before. At the center of it all was Sophia, who had been by Michael's side throughout the entire journey. She had become more than just a business partner. She was his confidant, his biggest supporter, and now his partner in life. As the evening drew closer to the celebration, Michael found her by the pool, talking with a few guests who had arrived early. When their eyes met, she smiled and excused herself from the conversation to join him. "You ready for this?" Sophia asked, her eyes sparkling in the fading light. Michael chuckled, "As ready as I'll ever be. But honestly, I couldn't have done any of this without you." Sophia gave him a playful nudge. "Stop giving me all the credit. You're the one who's made this place what it is today." Michael smiled, though his expression softened with sincerity. "We did this together, I mean it." Sophia's smile faltered for just a moment, her eyes filling with emotion. "I know, and I couldn't be more proud of what we've accomplished." As the evening wore on, the grand reopening officially began. The resort was filled with the sound of music, laughter, and the clinking of champagne glasses. Guests mingled on the lawn, enjoying the carefully prepared hors d'oeuvres and the stunning view of the ocean. Michael moved through the crowd with Sophia by his side, greeting familiar faces and thanking everyone for their support. Linda, Michael's mother, stood near the entrance, her eyes shining with pride as she watched her son take on the role of leader with the same grace and determination that his father had once embodied. She had been a quiet but steadfast presence throughout the rebuilding process, guiding Michael when he needed it most and giving him the space to find his own path. When Michael finally made his way to her, they shared a quiet moment together, looking out at the resort. "God, your father would have loved this," Linda said softly, her voice filled with warmth. "He always believed this place was more than just a business. It was a sanctuary, a place where people could come to find peace." Michael nodded, his heart swelling with emotion. "That's what I want it to be too, for everyone, guests, staff, all of us." Linda smiled, reaching out to gently squeeze his arm. "You've done him proud, Michael, and you've made your own mark here. This resort isn't just your father's legacy anymore, it's yours too." Michael swallowed the lump in his throat, feeling the weight of her words. He had spent so much of his time trying to live up to his father's expectations, but now, standing here with his mother, he realized that he had created something uniquely his own. His father's influence would always be part of the resort, but Michael had taken the reins and led the way into a new era. Later that evening, Michael took the stage to address the crowd. The guests gathered around, their faces filled with anticipation as the music quieted. The moment felt surreal, standing there with so many eyes on him, knowing that they were all here to celebrate what the resort had become under his leadership. He cleared his throat, the microphone in his hand feeling heavier than usual. But as he looked out at the crowd, at Linda, Sophia, and the staff who had become his family, his nerves melted away. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Michael began, his voice carrying through the warm evening air. "This resort has been through a lot over the past year. We faced challenges we never could have predicted, and there were moments when I wasn't sure we'd make it. But here we are." There were murmurs of agreement from the crowd, and Michael smiled, feeling a surge of confidence. "I took over this resort after my father passed, and at first, I wasn't sure if I was the right person for the job. I doubted myself, and I doubted whether I could live up to his legacy, but I've learned something important over the past few months. It's not about living up to someone else's expectations. It's about creating something new. Something that reflects who you are and what you believe in." Michael's eyes scanned the crowd, pausing briefly on Sophia, whose smile gave him the strength to continue. "I didn't do this alone," he said, his voice growing more emotional. "This resort has always been about the people, the staff, the guests, the community we've built here. That's what makes this place special. And I'm incredibly proud of what we've accomplished together." The crowd erupted into applause, and Michael felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. This wasn't just his moment. It belonged to everyone who had stood by him and believed in the vision for a brighter future. When the applause died down, Michael continued, "Tonight, we're not just celebrating a reopening. We're celebrating a new beginning, a fresh start for this resort and for all of us. We've come through the storm, and now it's time to look ahead, to build something even greater than what came before." With that, the celebration truly began. The music picked up again, and the guests resumed their conversations, toasting to the future of the resort. As the evening wound down, Michael found a quiet spot near the edge of the beach, away from the festivities. The sound of the waves crashing against the shore was soothing, and for the first time in a long while, he felt at peace. Sophia joined him, slipping her hand into his as they stood together, watching the moonlight dance on the water. "You did it," Sophia said softly, resting her head on his shoulder. "You brought this place back to life." Michael smiled, leaning into her warmth. "We did it. Together." For a moment, they stood in comfortable silence, the weight of the world finally lifting from their shoulders. They had faced so many challenges, but in the end, they had come out stronger, both as individuals and as partners. "What happens next?" Sophia asked, her voice filled with curiosity. Michael chuckled, glancing down at her. "Well, I was thinking we could start by taking a real vacation. No work, no stress, just us." Sophia laughed. The sound light and carefree. That sounds perfect. As they stood there, watching the waves roll in and out, Michael realized that the future was wide open. There would be more challenges, of course, there always were, but for now, he was content. He had rebuilt the resort, restored the legacy his father had left behind, and found love along the way. The Wilson Beach Resort wasn't just a place to him anymore, it was home. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.